Thea in the DC Universe. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 226 Steve hands in the task. Thanks to Diana's shared blessing from Artemis, and the shared divine power, Thea finally found the two in a small alley, seemingly a meeting place for an underground gang. After enjoying Diana's warm embrace, Thea asked Steve, bewildered, "Aren't you Captain America? Why are you so sneaky in England? Are you a double agent?" Steve crouched in the corner, waving his hands in silence, his gaze scanning the pedestrians on the main road, as if harboring ill intentions. "Hey, what's wrong with him?" Thea whispered to Diana, considering she'd only been away for a few days. "There seems to be something wrong with him." Diana, after spending a few days in human society, wasn't as straightforward as she had been at first. She watched Steve point his right finger at her head. Puff. Thea quickly covered her mouth, her heart pounding. Coward, spy, and mentally ill, so many labels slapped on him. No matter how charming comrade Steve Trevor was, he wouldn't be able to seduce Diana. So good. So satisfying. He patted Steve's shoulder nonchalantly. "Let's go, get the mission done." Steve, was quite capable. He made a gesture to keep quiet and said in a low voice, "There's a gunman under that low wall, the one with the hat." Thea looked over and saw he wasn't lying. Although he was pretending to read a newspaper, his eyes kept darting around the passers-by. He was indeed an enemy. Although she couldn't use divine powers, her years as an archer and her mage's spirit helped her identify three individuals with similar characteristics. In the original story, a nervous Diana believed these three individuals were sent by Ares. Filled with a sense of mission, Diana unleashed almost all her might, even resorting to the lasso of truth to deal with these three small fry. Needless to say, these were all just figments of Diana's imagination. How foolish must Ares be to send a few spies with pistols to kill a demigod? Having acquired the Constantine family's magic book, Thea's magic-wielding skills became increasingly adept. She tapped Steve's shoulder with her left hand. "Alright, they won't notice you if you go out. Go and turn in your quest. I'm invisible." Steve looked down at his hands, noticing nothing unusual. "Lower your presence. According to your understanding, people around you will automatically ignore you. Unless you do anything out of the ordinary, it's fine. Of course, killing someone is definitely not allowed. You go ahead, and we'll follow." Without even bothering to understand, Thea shoved him out of the alley. Steve, a mere mortal, couldn't withstand her immensely powerful strength. This shove sent him at least 10 meters. Suddenly thrust into the crowd, Steve realized no one noticed him. Even the tall man he'd previously suspected was intent on harming him was still staring at the alleyway. Amazing. "He can see me?" Steve took a few more steps toward the man, and finding he had indeed not noticed him, he shrugged off his worries and strode on. Thea and Diana naturally followed from a distance. She had hurried back to see Ares' strength. London couldn't possibly be a battlefield. Britain was a major force in World War I, while the United States was still a bystander. The streets of London were filled with high-ranking government officials and allied generals. If a war of gods broke out here, the damage to history would be devastating. Thea's patriotism was at least as strong as a sesame seed. She didn't want to go back to 2008 and find every American citizen speaking fluent German. Oh, his aesthetic taste is so strange. Is that his partner? Diana and Thea were walking a little behind when they noticed Steve suddenly approach a short, plump woman. They were chatting and laughing, and even hugged. Thea, still lost in thought about Ares, looked up at Steve after Diana's comment. She was indeed a short, plump woman, but what on earth was her partner? This must be Steve's secretary, right? Thea had a vague impression of this plump woman. She seemed like a comedic character. Now that Diana had misunderstood, let the misunderstanding continue. Steve found his right-hand man and was about to introduce the two women when he turned around and saw they were nowhere to be seen. It must have been the effects of that magic again. He had just walked past his secretary with such aplomb that she hadn't noticed him until they made physical contact. Steve, now completely convinced of the existence of magic, was ready to write a huge submission in the corner. He told the secretary to wait for him there and walked off with a swagger. But when he reached the Allied headquarters, he hesitated. According to the witch, this magic spell would allow him unimpeded entry, But what would he do once he was inside? Several generals were in a heated discussion. If he suddenly patted a general on the shoulder, would he be shot as a spy? Britain was now the first superpower in human history. Executing a minor American lieutenant wouldn't raise any eyebrows. But he couldn't break the spell since he couldn't see Thea, so he stamped his feet in anxiety. Miss Thea finally saw him hesitating at the entrance of the command office, and an invisible ripple dissipated from Steve. The guards at the entrance of the command office were standing guard, but suddenly they found a living person stamping his feet in front of them. They were almost scared to death. This assassin was too skilled. The two overly nervous guards raised their guns. Steve was also frightened by their overreaction, but fortunately he was quite skilled. He dodged the butt of the gun that was thrown at his face and handed over his ID. The guards took a look at his ID. He was an American captain. They didn't believe it at all. It would be easy for such a strong assassin like you to forge a captain's ID. You can't get in even if you show the ID of the British Prime Minister. Steve was speechless. Fortunately, at a crucial moment, the German spies temporarily distracted the guards. Three of them, previously watching the alley, suddenly noticed the commotion. Seeing Steve engaging with the guards, they exchanged glances, discarded their disguises, and, with their pistols drawn, charged at Steve. Unfortunately, their actions were too late. The two sides were 100 meters apart, and the guards, already terrified, immediately returned fire at the sound of gunfire. Chaos ensued in the street, and amidst the constant swarming, Thea and Diana automatically withdrew from the spell. Diana glanced at them, uncertainly asking, "Are these Ares men?" "Those are Germans." "What Germans?" "The Germans who come to our paradise island are the Germans." Thea didn't bother to dwell on the political implications. Excessive talk was pointless. Diana would figure it out later. Chapter 227 God of War? Ares. As expected, Diana understood immediately. She wasn't particularly familiar with the grudges between outsiders, but the group that wanted to kill her sisters on Paradise Island were undoubtedly bad guys. Should we go help? Why help? There are only 3 enemies. Look, reinforcements are coming over there. Thea was somewhat impressed by the 3 German spies. They were truly fearless. 3 men, 3 pistols in hand, rushed out from the Allied headquarters. While the guards weren't usually elite, there were at least a dozen of them, all armed with rifles. Somehow, the overly sensitive guard called a passing patrol, bringing in over 100 more. The 3 German spies were shot to pieces before they even had a chance to absorb the cyanide. A young man who looked to be a lieutenant colonel ran out of the headquarters upon hearing the rapid gunfire. Realizing it was a false alarm, he turned and told his confidants to tell the generals inside to crawl out from under the table. He had the situation under control. Damn it, there's no one left alive, but he looked around and realized he'd been too hasty in reporting his accomplishment. There were only 3 enemies on the ground, each riddled with bullets, their bodies unrecognizable. He yelled at the guards at the door, wondering if his superiors would blame him for not being competent. A guard saluted and shouted, "Sir, there's one alive." He pointed at Steve, whose face was swollen from being struck by a rifle butt. "I'm not German," Steve protested, raising his hand tremblingly. But the act of raising his hand earned him another blow from the butt. Steve was devastated. What the hell? He'd been mistaken for a German on Paradise Island, and now back at headquarters, he was still considered a German? It was unfair. Years of training finally paid off, and he methodically explained his background, codename, and all his superiors' contacts. The British lieutenant colonel listened to his explanation with a cold eye, then waved his hand to stop the guards from beating him. "Bring him in, and see the general." With that, he walked inside, his hands behind his back. He was already convinced that the man on the ground, his face battered like a pig's head, was not German, but he made no apology. He'd beaten him, so what? As a distinguished soldier of the British Empire, beating up a few American bumpkins was no big deal. They deserved death. The 2 women watched Steve being half-carried into the headquarters. "Isn't it inappropriate for us to just sit there and watch?" Diana felt a little soft-hearted. Although she didn't see any bright spots in Steve, they were still companions. Seeing him being carried in like a dead dog, she felt a little sympathetic. Thea also felt a little guilty that her magic had gotten in trouble. The original plot didn't seem to unfold this way, right? Fortunately, nothing unexpected had happened, and everything was within the expected range. What could she say now? She could only force an explanation. This was the quickest way to see the general. Just in case Diana didn't believe her, Thea even explained the relationship between Britain and the United States. Look, Steve is an American soldier. If he were respected in Britain, it would be detrimental to his future. Now it's good. He's not a good person, and the Americans are confident he won't betray their country, and the British don't think highly of him either. Look. Steve's partner is standing outside the door with a normal expression. To prove her point, Thea pointed at the fat secretary, who was standing there stupidly at the door, not understanding what was going on. She was terrified, wasn't she? Diana was a little confused, but she was still fooled by Thea's expression, which said that this was a very complicated matter and she couldn't say too much. She nodded thoughtfully. So what about us? Let's go in and take a look. The two women used suggestion again and swaggered in. The conference room, which should have been a chaotic mess in the original time and space, quickly quieted down after the first gunshot outside. Then, like a spring stretched to its limit, the entire venue erupted in chaos, infuriating Ares, who was feigning peace on the stage. Although his words were false and he himself didn't believe them, he was still frustrated that their noise had completely ruined his speech. He glanced at the two women who followed Stephen and pretended not to see them, feeling a deep sense of contempt. They couldn't even use invisibility, yet they came in under the spell of suggestion. After Zeus, no one could stop him. The generals, dignitaries, and representatives of the allied powers in the meeting were terrified by the gunshots. Now, seeing Steve being escorted in, some of them, who had been so embarrassed before, refused to listen and shouted for his execution. Ares, unwilling to let his important pawn die, feigned a warm-hearted defense on Steve's behalf and the others in attendance. Is this guy Ares? Thea calmly observed the figure, who bore a passing resemblance to Professor Lupin. His disguise was flawless, not a trace of divine power emanating from him. But her instincts told her he wasn't particularly strong. Thea had seen a lot by now. From Artemis, who dared not leave the divine realm, to Horus, whose skin was shredded upon entering the material world, to the demigod Diana and Lady Xanadu, she had seen many powerful figures, both great and small. The Ares before her wasn't even a projection, at most, he was an avatar, created by extracting a trace of energy from the very laws of war, exploiting the wars of the human world. While Thea couldn't defeat this figure with her current strength, with a divine bow in hand, she could easily escape. Could this figure's battle with Diana truly absorb enough energy to get home? Thea rubbed her chin, pondering. Ares didn't realize his strength was being underestimated. Thanks to his mediation efforts, the crowd angrily abandoned their plan to kill Steve. The dignitaries stormed out, and it remains unknown whether they returned to change their pants. Patriotic young man Steve, finally free from the bloodshed and tears, profusely thanked the righteous, lame Sir Ares. Having narrowly escaped death, he finally remembered his mission and, with a jolt of frustration, discovered he couldn't recognize a single word in the poison doctor's notebook he retrieved. Diana wanted to rush out to take up her promising job as a translator, but Thea quickly cast a silencing barrier around them, stopping her and telling her to wait. What a joke. The Allies were currently at war with the Central Powers. This wasn't just a fight between two villages, it involved dozens of countries, involving at least hundreds of languages. Poison Doctor wasn't an alien, so how could the Allies not understand their language? If Diana rushed out now, it would make the Allies appear incompetent, humiliating the generals. Especially in this era of discrimination against women, it would make them seem even less capable than women. Even if she achieved great success in the future, these people would automatically ignore Diana's achievements after recalling her current predicament, which would be detrimental to her resolve to protect humanity and integrate into human society. Even if one of these so-called big figures die of old age in the future, their ideas will still be passed on to the next generation. If the initial impression is not good, it will be too late to remedy it later. Chapter 228 Steve's Friend. It's 1918, not the beginning of the war, but nearing its end. All sorts of supplies and personnel are needed to support the war effort. A general secretary quickly summoned an elderly man wearing thick glasses from downstairs. The old man's knowledge was truly remarkable. He'd translated the entire notebook without much thought. Several Allied generals listened to the old man's reading of Dr. Poison's notes as if they were a story, then stated in a formal manner, "Captain Steve Trevor, you've done a good job. You can go find some rest." Steve, enraged by their bureaucratic practices, berated them for their idleness, then vividly demonstrated to Thea and Diana the concept of beating them with a stick. Looking at Steve being dragged out, Diana said to Thea in a puzzled tone, "Why do the human generals ignore what is about to happen? Are they under a spell?" Thea saw Ares, who was pretending to be lame, trembling with tears out of the corner of her eye. She knew that her silent barrier could not stop Ares from listening if he wanted to. She pretended not to see his disguise, and he also pretended not to see the two of them. This was quite interesting. Thea could not say too much about Diana's question. Diana's beliefs were not as firm as in the original time and space. She had described human society as too dirty. She might just give up and go back to Paradise Island like Zubayjian journey to the west. To prevent Ares from spotting her flaw, Thea feigned seriousness and said, "I didn't sense any magical fluctuations. Perhaps these generals are timid, naive Amazons." As expected, Ares scoffed at Thea's words. His perspective was too high. While he was a little skeptical about the appearance of a magician in a tribe as purely warrior as the Amazons, he didn't take it seriously. From his brief encounter with Steve, he had accessed a small portion of his surface memories and learned that this unexpected Amazon was called Artemis. He was well versed in the names of the gods of Paradise Island, and he automatically assumed that the trace of divine power in Thea was merely a byproduct of that name. At most, he was surprised that his divine sister, Artemis, was still alive and still possessing divine power, but these thoughts slipped through his mind, and he didn't take them seriously. As expected, Diana didn't dwell on Thea's explanation, simply squinting at the leading allied general with disdain, mistaking such political compromise for cowardice. Diana shook her head and said to Thea, "Steve's mission is complete. Let him continue his mission. Let's go to the front lines and find Ares. I will personally chop off his dog head and end this war." Thea's face twitched slightly at Diana's resolute statement, but she forced herself to hold it in, not daring to look at the dog-headed Ares in the house. She was afraid that the god of war would, in a fit of rage, disobey the script and transform and unleash his might in London. She could only proudly declare that this was her mission and let's go, and pull Diana out of the headquarters. Although Steve was no longer a burden, Diana couldn't fly yet, and Thea didn't want to take out her skateboard in broad daylight. So the two of them bought boat tickets to Belgium, preparing to go directly to the battle zone and search for the elusive Ares. In Liverpool, Thea had plundered the local gangs, and her elk ring was filled with a considerable amount of pounds. While not a millionaire, she now had a small fortune. The two women booked their boat tickets and checked into one of London's most luxurious hotels. Just after changing, Thea was engrossed in a book on the introduction to the dark arts when there was a sharp knock on the door. "Are you, Mr. Trevor?" Thea opened the door and saw a man with bruises on his face. She stared at him for a long time before recognizing him as Steve, whom she hadn't seen for a long time. The patriotic young man, Steve, now looked exhausted. "I've been searching all over the city hotels for ages, and finally I found you. You must help me." Steve was dejected. He didn't dare use American intelligence, so he had to ask around from the harbor station. He learned that the two women hadn't left the city. He assumed the women were poor, and initially they only found small hotels. After searching almost all of London, he finally found them in the most luxurious hotel. "Miss Artemis, I need your assistance. You must also need my help somewhere, right?" Steve was nearly despairing when he unexpectedly received assistance from a knight with limited mobility. The kind knight casually suggested they find a few helpers and act independently. Unaware that all this was Ares' suggestion, Steve assumed it was his own idea. He bid Ares a farewell with profuse gratitude and scurried across the city, exhausted, finally finding the two women. Thea had anticipated this. Ares' intentions were easy to grasp. He wanted Diana to witness the evil of humanity, shake her faith, and then, through sweet talk, seduce her to his side. His tactics were all about slow, ruthless execution. The more you see, the better. However, his own divine power was far from sufficient to monitor Diana. To maintain complete control, he used Steve. As long as Steve stayed close to Diana, his entire group's whereabouts would be within his grasp. Thea, of course, welcomed this. Completing the destined battle on the designated battlefield, gathering enough energy without disrupting the timeline, could there be a better outcome? Steve was immediately dragged to meet Diana, and Steve acted out another inner drama, how selfless he was, how he didn't tolerate any injustice. "For the sake of justice, for the safety of mankind, you must help me." Diana, who took it as her mission to protect mankind, fell for this and said she would do her best to help. Steve asked about the two's itinerary and said goodbye. He also knew that he couldn't rely entirely on these two gods. He still didn't understand what the Ares they mentioned was. Was it a person's name or an organization code name? He didn't know anything. In order to prevent the two from looking for Ares halfway, he had to recruit a few more people. Whether it was to strengthen his voice in this small team or to work alone in the future, he had to find a few more companions. The next morning, when Thea and Diana left the room and went to the lobby for breakfast, they found that the hotel waiter stopped one of Steve's companions. "Sir, I'm sorry, your Indian servants are not allowed in." "I'm not a servant," a short, curly-haired man next to Steve with some Indian ancestry objected angrily, but the waiter was very polite but his tone was extremely firm. "This is the most luxurious hotel in the world, and Indians are not allowed in." Chapter 229 Small Team Gathering. The commotion was naturally witnessed by the two women enjoying breakfast. Thea watched with indifference, while Diana frowned slightly, somewhat critical of Steve's chosen companion's appearance. Ancient Greece was a land of intense concern for appearance. Their gods and heroes were all tall and muscular, radiating a powerful beauty. Paradise Island, deeply influenced by their culture, naturally embodied this ethos. While Steve's combat prowess was limited, his personal appearance barely met Diana's aesthetic standards. However, the Indian companion he brought today, 1.6 meters tall, dark-skinned, with curly hair and a short beard, and a slight hunchback, was anything but a Greek aesthetic. In the future, after a century of human life, Diana would be able to accept all kinds of people. But having just left Paradise Island, though she wasn't one to judge by appearance, she still felt a bit irritated by this unusual-looking individual. Wouldn't his presence lower the average appearance of the group? Unconsciously, she felt a flicker of resentment towards Steve. Fortunately, Steve didn't come alone. A kind cripple soon stepped out from behind him. Thea's eyes flickered slightly. Was Ares going to formally meet Diana? As Ares had been disguised in human society for many years, he understood people's hearts very well. He used his status as a knight to successfully resolve the dilemma of the Indian man. Steve also saw the two women. He walked quickly to them and introduced the cripple behind him. "This is the patriotic gentleman I mentioned to you who supports me very much, Sir Patrick Morgan. Sir, these two are my companions I met on my journey. They are both friends with a strong sense of justice. This is Diana, and this is Artemis." The old cripple Ares disguised himself very well. He didn't reveal any of his divine power. He was just an ordinary old man. When he saw the two women, he took off his hat in a very old-fashioned way. Thea sneered inwardly. HMPH, he wouldn't dare come up and shake hands with me. Once he did, it would be useless to hide it. Unexpectedly, her cold attitude had caused Ares to misunderstand her, further confirming her Amazon identity. Ares ignored Thea, his attention automatically shifting to Diana. Diana certainly hadn't noticed anything unusual about him. Seeing Thea remain silent, she, new to human society, didn't know what to say, so she simply nodded in respect. Steve introduced the two elite recruits he had recruited, a short Indian man who claimed to speak many languages, and a white man with puffy eyes and a yarmulke, who he described as a sharpshooter with unerring accuracy. An Indian, a Jew? Counting the Indians on the front lines, a multinational force was assembled. This was very much in keeping with the American spirit. Thea glanced at the two and then looked away. Calling them just a sideshow was a compliment. The so-called sharpshooter was a joke. Such a fellow wouldn't survive more than 3 days on the European battlefield. Perhaps their only commendable quality was their fearlessness. Perhaps feeling a bit frustrated by the two men he'd found, Steve launched into a torrent of his own plan, which Thea considered utterly idiotic. It was simply him and the others charging forward, while the cripple sir, who held the intelligence, would direct the others through Steve's portly secretary. This would not only help Ares keep tabs on their whereabouts, but also give him the satisfaction of playing chess. Thea sneered. He considered himself a chess player, but he didn't know that more powerful forces were watching behind the scenes. This farce was ultimately just a novice's test given to Diana by the gods. However, having received the longbow from the goddess, Thea naturally wouldn't sabotage it. She would strive to fulfill her promising role as a supporting role. Thus, this plan, clearly formed under Ares' divine guidance, passed smoothly despite the silence of the two women and the lack of feedback from their helpers. Finally, Eris handed Steve an envelope, euphemistically saying, "This money will last you a few days." Then, with a smile, he said goodbye to the others. Thea glanced at the envelope's thickness and curled her lips. It's so thin. Even optimistically, it wouldn't have been more than 10 sheets. What a cheapskate. After deducting the commission for hiring the two elites, the remaining money would probably only be enough for a few days. The rest of the time, they'd be starving. Steve, perhaps reflecting on this, felt the envelope's thickness and glanced at the two women, who now seemed to be staying in a luxury hotel. Of course, Thea wouldn't let them take the boat. They sailed aboard a luxury ship. After breakfast with Diana, who kept praising the delicious breakfast and promising prospects, she dragged Steve and his two elite men aboard a merchant ship said to be registered under the neutral Dutch Queen. In less than half a day, they reached the Belgian coast and successfully found Steve's third helper, an Indian nicknamed Chief. Unable to speak the language, Thea couldn't fathom why this Indian would come to the European battlefield to fight for the white people. Diana had shown a slight interest in the towering chief, but after she single-handedly flung the sturdy man 10 meters, that interest vanished completely. Outsiders are so weak, Diana complained to Thea with some distress. Thea was speechless. What do you mean? You can't use me as a standard to judge outsiders. That's a dangerous idea. What if you ever see the infamous Batmaster and want to test his mettle? Wouldn't you just punch him to the moon? After this incident, the chief, still a little resentful, somehow got the better of him and challenged Thea and Diana to archery and lasso respectively. The results were self-evident. The once imposing Indian now looked away from the two women, especially after learning from Steve that Thea was a witch. He no longer dared to show off his muscles in front of them. The team engaged in a heated debate over whether to stop the Germans from spreading poison first or to find Eris in the heart of the battlefield. Thea naturally sided with Diana. At the end of the argument, Steve made a startling claim. German General Ludendorff was Eris, and he was also planning a gas attack. What a coincidence. Let's go kill him, and maybe Eris will die. Steve described Ludendorff as the root of all evil, the kind who couldn't stop eating a few children. Diana, hearing such a horrifying story for the first time, was furious and resolved to join them in defeating the cannibal Ludendorff. Thea expressed admiration for Steve's willingness to lie openly to curry favor. Steve, taking advantage of their lack of knowledge of the First World War, fabricated a story about a general who, driven by aggressive military tactics, launched a world war to satisfy his own personal ambitions. The story was so well-reasoned that if Thea hadn't taken history classes, she would have almost believed it. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 230 Warfront. Having secured their target, Steve breathed a sigh of relief. He also knew that relying on the elites he had recruited to assassinate Ludendorff, leader of the Junker nobility, was pure fantasy. Now, though it was a slight sacrifice of dignity to bring these two fierce women aboard, it was acceptable for the sake of the nation. Unbeknownst to Thea, when world peace finally returned, Diana approached Steve with the American history textbook, demanding an explanation for the story he had fabricated. Steve was speechless, and the two ultimately broke off their friendship. Steve gloated, unaware of the price he would pay for his unfounded lies. As the squad passed through a village on the battlefield, Diana faced her first choice. A disheveled woman, holding a child, grabbed Diana and said, "Please help me. I've run out of my house and all my food. Please help me." Thea, in time, gave a look of concern, but suspicion welled up within her. This middle-aged woman, seemingly intact, knew the battle was about to begin, but she wasn't running away, instead hiding in a trench with her child. How dare she? At least 80 people had passed by her, and yet she had grabbed Diana with such precision? Such an unusual thing. Thea could only laugh. Now wasn't the early stages of a war, a period of stalemate. The war was almost over, the rear was stable, and this woman only needed to run 10 miles west to be completely safe. Yet, she chose to hide like a quail in this trench on the front lines. "We should help her. She says her village has no food, and the villagers have been enslaved. It's my duty." Diana, unusually, didn't consult Thea this time. While that was perfectly normal, Thea still felt a little sad. Little Diana was finally growing up. Steve didn't realize this was Ares' test. He stuck to his original plan, cross the village and head for the next safe spot. How can you be so sympathetic? Diana raised her eyebrows and glared at Steve. Then, turning to Thea, she said, "Sister, you will support me, right?" Thea feigned hesitation. "Diana, the Queen won't allow us to participate in the war." Diana's eyes instantly lost their luster. "But I won't fight in the name of an Amazonian." Thea grabbed a nearby rifle. "I'll fight as a human. I said I'll always support you." Her resolute tone made Diana almost jump with happiness. She looked at Steve and the others. "What about you?" Steve, still obsessed with his dream of saving the country, avoided her gaze. "Never mind the remaining 3 elites. Killing them for a few £100? You're kidding." Diana untied her hair, letting it fall back over her shoulders. She put on Antiope's forward protector and removed her coat, revealing her gleaming golden gear. She glanced back at the others. "I'll go save them." Then she jumped out of the trench and ran towards the German position opposite. Thea, pretentiously holding a rifle, covered her from behind. There was no other way. This place was different from Paradise Island. The German soldiers at that time were destined to be annihilated. Anyone could be killed. Even if there were a few prisoners, with Hippolyta's heart, could she let them leave the island and spread propaganda? What a joke. But Thea couldn't just casually cut down anyone on the battlefield. What if one of those German soldiers turned out to be the father or grandfather of a future great-grandfather, and she accidentally killed him? That would be a huge disaster. But it wouldn't be appropriate to disregard Diana, so she came up with a seemingly impassioned, yet blatantly slacking tactic. She wouldn't use the divine name, nor the divine bow, but would instead fight as a human, firing blindly from the back with a rifle, leaving no one to blame. Furthermore, the battlefield was ablaze with gunfire, and her ranged attacks were nearly maxed out. Hitting targets was easy, and missing was equally easy. No one paid any attention to her constant misses. She'd occasionally fire a shot at a dead body on the ground, figuring a shot wouldn't affect the timeline, right? She sat back and slacked in peace, while Diana exemplified how a divinely armored defensive warrior could dominate ordinary people, blocking, dodging, and parrying. Bullets came, she blocked with her arm guards. Shells came, she angled with her shield. The Germans were no pushovers. Several machine gunners roared and unleashed a barrage of ammunition at her. Diana's advance was halted, and she shielded herself securely with her round shield. This shield, similar in function to Captain America's shield from Marvel, had a built-in taunting function. The German soldiers saw it as if it were their father's murderer, ignoring Diana's long legs as they rained down countless rounds on it. Thea felt a slight surge of magical energy, and Steve's blood suddenly surged. He leaped from the trench with a thud, and several of his men, for unknown reasons, followed with renewed courage. Such unusual behavior naturally caught Thea's attention. Was it a confusion spell? It didn't seem like it. Thea opened the Eye of Horus and glanced over Steve's head. Haha, countless soldiers and horses were fighting in the shadows. This was the realm of the god of war. It looked like Ares had tampered with him. Thea hadn't planned to disrupt Ares' spell. Steve now possessed a minor blessing from the god of war, and as long as he didn't leap into the barrel of the cannon, he shouldn't be killed. However, the effect wasn't particularly strong. Thea surveyed the elites and found that the war god's presence was barely visible. Perhaps their charge was driven more by their friendship with Steve? While their individual combat power was insignificant, their presence was the final straw. When the chief tossed a grenade into the German trench, Diana seized the opportunity and charged in. Sensing victory, the Allied trench commander ordered a general assault. Thea charged forward, rifle in hand, in a formal manner. "Diana, are you alright?" Thea observed. Not a single hair had fallen from the man's body. He looked like a true god. "I'm fine. Which village are we going to?" Diana, having learned the power of human weapons through this battle, was now much more confident. Unscathed, what was there to fear? She led the charge into the German-held village. Thea lacked her defensive gear and wasn't as aggressive. Although her divinely transformed body was impervious to ordinary bullets, a hit still hurt. The two kept their distance as they charged into the village. The ensuing battle was exhilarating for Diana, but restrictive for Thea. This German soldier had a full forehead. It seemed he shouldn't have died here. This young man looked so young and had a bright future ahead of him. Let's spare his life. Eventually, Thea gave up fighting altogether, calling out to the villagers hiding in their homes. Using her powerful psychic power, She led a large group of villagers eastward, fleeing to the battlefield. Their numbers were so numerous that Diana gave up fighting and provided cover as she led the villagers away. Chapter 231 Diana's Future Development. Leave this to me, you deal with the enemy. Thea was intent on maintaining a strong presence while avoiding disrupting the course of history. The villagers' fate was of no concern to her, she simply wanted to appear to love life. With Diana, such a fierce defender, approaching, how could she happily idle away? The right thing to do was to quickly dispatch Diana to the front lines. Then be careful. Diana, oblivious to her concerns, simply assumed she was genuinely helping her resolve her worries. Touched, she charged into the German stronghold like a gust of wind. Her left-hand sword slashed, her right-hand shield slammed, and her long legs allowed her to charge and kick the enemy whenever she saw a flaw. Outside, Thea naturally witnessed Diana's agile, beast-like form. Wherever Diana touched, she killed and wounded everyone she touched. Those struck by the fake Godslayer sword were relatively unscathed, those bruised and deformed by the shield's blows were the worst. Of course, the worst were those sent flying over 10 meters with a single kick, their entrails vomited out. After Steve, acting as a human helicopter, sent Diana flying 10 meters high, dispatching the sniper at the village bell tower, the fighting finally subsided. Seeing their battle over, Thea saw the few remaining German soldiers flee, ending a farce that had ostensibly been a hawk catching chicks, while she was leading the villagers on a scramble. She also deliberately gave the villagers a few minutes to rest, delaying the photo op. The villagers were reckless. The enemy hadn't even left yet, and the village had been nearly destroyed by Diana. And yet, they were taking photos amidst the rubble? A crowd celebrated boisterously, and Diana, the savior, and the others were surrounded in the village, capturing a photo that would live on for centuries. How is it going? Doesn't being a savior feel fulfilling? Thea thanked the villagers who offered to take her home and approached Diana, who was standing alone in the rubble. Those Germans were also physically fragile, just like these villagers. Why didn't they resist? Was it because of the weapons? Diana pointed at the hundreds of villagers who had suddenly poured into the square, her face full of confusion. Many of these men were strong, so why had they been hiding during the battle? She understood that if this had happened on Paradise Island, the ground would have been littered with corpses and blood. These villagers, all able-bodied, had no limbs, so why didn't they have the slightest bit of resistance? Humanity is complex. We can't simply judge it by good or evil, cowardice or bravery. Some people are cowardly throughout their lives, but they're not bad people. Some people act without hesitation, but they're not good people. Thea gently brushed her cheek, wiping away the dirt. Diana, you're not a god, not a human, Thea continued, her eyes dimming. You're not an Amazon either. You're too unique, one of a kind in this world. Humanity has its own path, something the gods can't interfere with. You're not a babysitter, and humans aren't as weak as you think. You can't just blindly use your power to help them. You should uphold the justice in your heart. Thea knew that changing Diana's beliefs wouldn't be a one-night stand. Her outlook on life was forged by Hippolyta's 5,000 years of unremitting effort. It wasn't good or bad, just wishful thinking. In the days that followed, despite always fighting on the front lines, Diana didn't understand her true nature. After Darkseid's death, Superman and others ascended to godhood, Superman the god of strength, Batman the god of knowledge, the Flash the god of death. Even a kid like Shazam could be crowned a god of gods. What merit and power did he possess? Diana alone gained nothing. What she had been was still what she had been. Was it because she hadn't put in enough effort? Was she slacking off during the fight? Neither. Thea felt the problem lay in her inability to find her true self. The god's blessing had elevated her vision and abilities, but it also profoundly constrained her development. Comparing her strength to Superman's, or her intelligence to Batman's, she was undefeated. Of course, her average was far above the average superhero, which was why she fought so fiercely until the end. It would have been possible if she had consistently upheld the beliefs she protected, but she was repelled by the ugliness of human society and ultimately fled into near exile, becoming a professor at the Louvre. Thea was trying to help her strengthen her convictions. The gods of power and knowledge were a bit extreme and didn't suit Diana's personality, so what about the gods of protection? Or the gods of justice? But thanks to that damn time travel, Thea couldn't elaborate further, only hinting at her thoughts briefly. Protection? Mother said so too. Since you all say so, I'll persevere. Diana, still a little confused, didn't dwell on the question. Ah, Thea sighed inwardly. Diana still didn't understand what she was supposed to do. She was like a child, doing whatever her parents and relatives told her to do. This wasn't going to work. Thea wished she could fly back to 2008 and give her a proper lesson. You too. I found Ludendorff's location, just a few kilometers away. There's a banquet going on there. This is our chance. Steve trotted over to announce the good news. This was the goal they had long ago. In the following minutes, Steve joined his friends and described the grand plan to the two women in elaborate language. It was to infiltrate and slaughter as many as they could. Kill one to break even, and kill two to profit. Thea understood this as a reckless rush to kill Ludendorff. As for the subsequent retreat and relocation, Captain Steve hadn't considered it at all. Were you so sure that once this German general was dead, no one would launch a poison gas attack? Thea forced herself to bite back the words. This guy was so weak now. How many blows had he endured in the past century to transform into the cunning and calm leader of the Sky Eye Society a century from now? To prevent any mishaps, Thea had been studying the Constantine family's magic book. She planned to erase Steve's memory of her before she left this world. Using the methods used by the ninja master to bully Malcolm, she also concocted an herb to add 1 drop daily to Steve's diet. This two-pronged approach meant that without extremely advanced magical skills, no clues would be discovered. Even if they were discovered, their memories would be completely erased, and even the most skilled wizard wouldn't be able to create a memory out of thin air. As for Steve's companions, they weren't so troublesome. Theoretically, they wouldn't have experienced those adventures and wouldn't live to see the 21st century. Thea could simply brainwash them. Chapter 232 Moon River, added for Yuan's 10,000 yuan reward. After Steve finished explaining the current dire situation and seeing that the two women agreed, he took his multinational teammates to a get-together with the villagers. Of course, he used the excuse of looking for a set of German officers' uniforms. Even needing to look? They were everywhere. Thea watched speechlessly as the towering Indian chief flexed his muscular muscles like a bull at a young girl. You look like you're worried about something. The two of them didn't join the festivities, walking hand in hand along the country path. Diana, noticing Thea's awkward expression, immediately asked, Thea hesitated, then decided to tell part of the truth. After the battle with Ares, I'm going back. Go back. Diana wasn't Hippolyta. She didn't have a god king to accompany her to gaze at the stars and the moon. She was momentarily stunned by Thea's idea of going back. Yes, I'm going back to where I came from. My family is waiting for me, alien? Or maybe you're not from this world? Or from this time. Diana was a well-versed scholar in theology, and her extensive reading wasn't in vain. She quickly analyzed several answers. Thea remained silent, neither confirming nor denying. They stopped halfway up the mountain. They gazed out at the brightly lit village nearby, the sounds of cheerful laughter faintly audible even from a distance. Will I see you again? Unlike their separation on Paradise Island, Diana knew nothing had happened to those people. She simply couldn't return. Now, facing Thea, Diana experienced separation for the first time in her life. A cascade of emotions coursed through her, and she couldn't quite put her finger on the feeling. Of course, but it'll take a long time. Thea smiled at her. They'd been together for over 6 months, and by now, they felt like family. How long will you be gone? About 100 years. Diana breathed a sigh of relief at hearing 100 years. She'd thought it was much longer. With her 5,000-year lifespan, 100 years was nothing. Thea hadn't hidden her secrets about absorbing divine power. They both had long lifespans now, and if they didn't act suicidal, they could live a long time. Don't worry, I'll find you again, Thea said confidently, still considering returning to the original timeline and dragging Diana along to fight the Ninja Master. If we drag Batman and Superman along, the Ninja Master will be able to force his way no matter how many cards he has, right? He glanced at the foot of the mountain. Hey? They are dancing. Can you dance? Although they were halfway up the mountain, they could both see very far. As the saying goes, Diana's ability has no shortcomings. After hearing her words, he also looked at the foot of the mountain. Sure enough, the villagers were singing and dancing to celebrate their victory. Diana said a little arrogantly, I have the wisdom of Athena. There's nothing in this world that I can't do. But why are they dancing with a man and a woman? We are not like that in Paradise Island. Xia's face was a little strange. There's not even a male creature there. What else can you do if you don't dance with women? But the good habits of Paradise Island set a good example for her. Originally, Xiao thought that women dancing would be abrupt, but now it's okay. This is the tradition of Paradise Island. Beautiful lady, will you dance with me? Thea conjured a white gown, immense style, that looked a bit like Kato Kid. To nail the knockoff, she even conjured a slew of white feathers that fluttered in the wind. Diana, deeply influenced by the heroic romance of ancient Greece, was delighted with her movements and gracefully offered her hand. I do, my knight. Under the bright moonlight, the two danced gracefully on the mountainside, oblivious to the surroundings. Thea, already a formidable dancer, had been nurtured by Mora since childhood, and now, with her agility and memories of being chosen by Artemis, blended classical Greek dance with modern steps and forms. Like a living spirit, she danced, caressed by the gentle breeze, a dance never before seen in the present or future. Diana possessed a formidable memory and physical coordination. In ancient Greece, a land where appearance was paramount, dance was a compulsory course for every citizen. Paradise Island, a secluded place passed down from generation to generation by this ancient civilization, naturally retained its tradition of dance. Diana, with her formidable learning ability, gradually caught up with Thea. Each had her own unique characteristics. Thea paired masculine clothing with an elegant demeanor, while Diana wore imposing armor beneath a feminine inner self. Thea felt a little disappointed that the lack of musical accompaniment was a bit lacking. Then, she thought, a song in her memory perfectly suited the current situation. Although the song hadn't been released yet, would it be a big deal if she sang it herself? Thea silently apologized to Audrey Hepburn, softened her throat, and began to sing. Moon River, wider than a mile. A gorgeous expanse of water stretches for 1,000 miles. I'm crossing you in style someday. Someday, I'll meet you gracefully. Oh, dream maker, you heartbreaker. Oh, this intoxicating river, this river of shattered dreams. Wherever you're going, I'm going your way. Wherever you're going, I'm with you. Two drifters, off to see the world. The song is short, and the original singer sang it too low. That sentimental farewell doesn't suit either of their personalities. Both Thea and Diana are the kind who would sever a golden knot with a single blow. Thea sings the entire song with an exceptionally high pitch. The moonlight washes over her voice, making it crystal clear and pure. Diana naturally hears the meaning of her voice. Their eyes meet, their hearts brimming with understanding. Diana nods deeply, knowing that no matter what lies ahead, she will always have someone by her side. Their dancing initially attracted little attention, until Thea's singing began, and the villagers slowly paused their celebrations. What song is that? It's too far away, I can't hear it clearly, but it's really beautiful, several villagers murmured among themselves, and the Indian man sidled up to Steve. Hey, are those two women on the mountain? You haven't told me where you met such beautiful, powerful women. The Indian man pondered for a long time, unable to come up with a word to describe Diana's immense fighting power, only vaguely referring to her as powerful women. Where are they from? Steve found himself unable to articulate the words, and the more he tried to speak, the more vague his memory became. He had no idea it was the effect of Paradise Island's barrier, automatically blaming Thea for such a supernatural event. I can't tell you, Sammy. Believe me, I didn't mean to hide it. I owe you a lot of chapters, and I'll pay them back slowly. Shouting out, begging for votes. Chapter 233 Faith. Don't get too excited when you hear this song next time. Thea didn't realize she'd been putting the blame on others for years, and today Steve got the blame back. She felt great after singing, but then she remembered the consequences. What if Diana saw Audrey Hepburn singing this song in the future? He began to talk to Diana in a low voice, trying to make some compromises. I've never heard this song before, and it's so beautiful. Are you implying that I'll hear it in the future? So it's a song from the future? Are you also from the future timeline? Oh, no wonder you didn't fight with all your strength this afternoon. Diana was naive, not stupid. With so many clues, she could figure out the truth with just a few deductions. What else could Thea say? She could only nod. Diana hugged her elbows, her eyes constantly scanning Thea. You didn't dare join the battle this afternoon because you feared a chain reaction? But you still insisted on participating in the Battle of Ares. Does that mean Ares will be defeated by me? As long as she didn't get into complicated political issues, Diana instantly transformed into Death Knight, spouting astonishing deductions one after another. Seeing that Thea neither nodded nor shook her head, Her conviction reached its peak. Thea stared at Diana, her fighting spirit brimming with emotion. She hadn't expected such a deduction to solidify her conviction of victory. Call it a fluke or historical necessity, Diana finally returned to the original plot, her unwavering belief in her ability to defeat Ares. After Ares is defeated, does that mean my mission is over? Diana hesitated, even though she knew she shouldn't ask. Thea patted her on the back. How could that be? My knight, your mission has only just begun, knight? Do you think I look like a knight? Diana, clearly having read many chivalric novels, said with a hearty laugh. That's right. Look at you, you have a shield and a sword. If you're not a knight, what else could you be? I'm a weak woman who needs your protection. Nonsense, you're not a weak woman, my lord mage. Haha, Diana seemed to enjoy this role-playing, even miming the gait of a majestic king. The opposite of cute is truly the cutest thing. Thea was overjoyed to see the usually serious Diana finally smile. But this game of knight and mage pretending couldn't continue. The story of King Arthur was well known, and Diana, having been a homebody for 5,000 years, was undoubtedly familiar with it. It would be bad if she started thinking about Merlyn or something like that. Thea quickly changed the subject. The next day, the six of them said goodbye to the villagers and set off on the final leg of their journey. As they approached the German castle, Steve, disguised as a German officer, and Sammy, posing as an Indian driver, went in first to gather intelligence. To avoid making any drastic changes, Thea separated from the others early, casting an invisibility spell and lying on the roof of the castle to bask in the sun. When she tired of lying, she'd pull out her magic book to study, and when she tired of reading, she'd go back to basking. She didn't plan to participate in the later plot, she just wanted to be nearby during Diana's battle with Ares. Remember, Zeus's arrows recharged automatically. She was happily flipping through a book with the odd title, Defense Against the Dark Arts. She complained for a long time, wondering if reading such a book full of complaints would transport her straight to the world of Harry Potter. Unexpectedly, after just 3 pages, the elk in her space ring relayed a vague message. The goddess wishes to see me. Deities are no small matter, and the goddess of night must dislike sunlight. Thea quickly descended from the castle of some old German nobleman and walked to a dense forest, where she stood with a serious expression, awaiting the goddess's inquiries. What? The goddess is low on magic power and needs me to supply it. After Thea stood there for 3 minutes, the elk delivered another message, leaving her a little overwhelmed. What the hell? I have to pay mana to talk to me? A two-way fee? So out of touch with the times. Despite some complaints, Thea followed the elk's instructions, considering the goddess hadn't given her any responsibilities but instead had given her many benefits. She poured a small portion of her own mana into the ring. A dizzying moment, she found herself back in the high-dimensional space she'd last seen, though it was far less stable. Thea waited a full 10 minutes before the goddess, like an old TV with a broken signal, emerged from somewhere. Your Majesty, hello, Thea Quinn, my chosen one. I didn't expect we'd meet again so soon. The goddess' voice was as clear as ever. I'm here to ask a favor of you, the goddess said, a little embarrassed. I'm at your service, Thea shouted, her slogan resounding, but her next words instantly shattered her spirit. Unfortunately, I have nothing to repay you with. Will you still help me? The goddess' voice was filled with sadness. The elk rubbed its head against Thea's calf, its flattering intent clear. Poor bastard. You've got nothing? And you expect me to help you just by talking? Thea was about to refuse, but at least she still had a shred of conscience. She had indeed taken a lot of advantage last time, and now the goddess looked so miserable, she might as well lend a hand. She nodded with a dignified air. Your generosity is enough to illuminate this dark night. I am willing to help you. Though the goddess couldn't see her face, she could sense a sigh of relief. I had already accepted my inevitable demise, but your night dance last night gave me new life. I must first express my gratitude. Last night's song and dance, Thea couldn't quite put her finger on the emotion. I danced, and the goddess came back to life. This faith-based deification rises quickly, but also dies quickly. It was like a joke. A dance of her own could bring the dying goddess of night back to life? Seeing the goddess's plight further solidified her determination to pursue the path of power-based deification. This faith-based deification was too dependent on external circumstances. The goddess seemed to be running out of time, not giving Thea much time to consider. After seeing your singing and dancing, The villagers around here have developed a certain superficial faith. Thea guessed something and quickly interrupted. Your Majesty, I can't change the timeline. If I were to preach in this era, I'm afraid, don't worry, I'm not that vulnerable yet. I can still hold on for a few hundred years. I just want to ask, would you be willing to return to your time and help me spread some faith? Thea pondered it intently. It wasn't difficult. While faith couldn't be completely relied upon, some was always good. The belief of all beings could, to a certain extent, turn danger into fortune. This was exactly what Thea's own statue had been considering when it was placed on Paradise Island. A small amount of faith absorbed would be like carrying a good luck charm without damaging the foundation. As the goddess's faith strengthened, so too would she, the chosen one. It seemed appropriate to agree to the request. Chapter 234, Destroying the Village. Thea thought for a moment, then asked, Your Majesty, are you seeking to expand the reach of your faith, so you agree? The goddess was clearly delighted. Even Thea could sense the excitement of seeing a glimmer of hope in a seemingly certain death. Of course, the wider the spread, the better. How could there be a problem? Thea asked with concern, noticing Thea's hesitation. Of course there was a problem, a major one. Europe and America were now Christian territories. Although Thea couldn't understand the connection between the God so often mentioned by the European and American people and the supreme being who created the DC world, the fact that God didn't slam the continent into the sea in anger over the people's constant mention of him was telling. Although his vision had long transcended the realm of mortals like the power of faith, wouldn't spreading the faith of the goddess of night in his own territory simply lead to its demise? Perhaps all the gods and kings in this world combined wouldn't be enough to hold a finger of his. Thea felt a pang of distress. It was obvious that Artemis didn't know of God's existence. Even as a god, he didn't know how he knew. This is simply inexplicable. Have you, goddess, considered the issue of unity among the 12 Olympians? Thea pondered, finally finding an excuse. Yet, back then, a bunch of gods agreed to die with a smile on their faces, and now you're coming back to life? What's the point? Are we left with the 11 to play football in the astral plane? It's not the lack of wealth that's the problem, but the inequality. Gods are no different from ordinary people in life and death situations. We're all a happy family, we're all brothers and sisters. That's all nonsense. The 12 of them have been sabotaging each other countless times. Now that all 11 are about to die, you, Artemis, have found a scapegoat to help you gather faith. You're essentially giving the other gods a leg up. How can this be allowed? Either take us along, or die with us. The moon goddess's humanoid form also recognized Thea's subtext. She paced repeatedly, pondering for a long time before finally reaching a decision. You make sense. We can't publicize this on a grand scale. You can do some work on a smaller scale. Now that I've officially awakened, you can no longer take my divine name. To compensate you, I'll grant you a small privilege, the goddess said, pointing at Thea. A faint, short-lived, transparent aura connected the two. She hadn't asked for this divine name in the first place. Thea had long since abandoned it. It was an honor in the eyes of the people of Paradise Island, but nothing to her. Returning now to receive some privilege seemed like a good thing, but she felt herself, seemingly feeling no enhancements. Sensing her doubt, the goddess said, from now on, at night, whenever someone calls your name within a certain radius, you will automatically hear the next 5 words. Of course, this range will expand as your divine power increases. At first, this ability seemed useless, but Thea instantly realized that this was the true terror of the gods. They knew the moment you mentioned their name. This was clearly a weakened version, limited in scope and time, but its uses were truly endless. Thea's immediate thought was to take control of the group and, after badmouthing anyone, send them to Siberia. But she soon understood the goddess's intentions. Since she was secretly spreading the faith on her behalf, she was her representative. Wasn't the best way to express dissatisfaction with the goddess to speak ill of her? So that was her concern. Thea now had a clearer understanding of the deity's foresight. However, spreading the faith back home would require some effort. Even if Thea had the guts, she wouldn't dare spread it to Europe and America. The Arab world was a harsh place, and the Crusaders had fought for centuries without success. She had no chance. After much deliberation, if nothing else worked, could she spread the faith in Africa under the guise of the Quinn Group's poverty alleviation program? But why did it feel like she was going to have to confront the Egyptian gods again? There's no rush for faith. If you can't go back, Everything is in vain. Your Majesty, I will do my best to spread your faith, but what about my going back? The goddess seemed to see what she meant and smiled brightly. Ares' strength is still sufficient. You look eager to try. Do you also want to join the war? Ares' divinity of war is also yours? If you want to go, then go ahead. The eyes of the gods are focused there. Ares' clone is destined to fall today. His original body has been separated from the side of the gods. You can fight freely without affecting the timeline. Oh, this is great. Xia was originally a little worried about Diana fighting alone, but now that she heard that it would not affect the timeline, her fighting spirit was instantly high. Then Your Majesty, I will go to join the war. Go, my chosen one, I will keep an eye on you in the kingdom of God. Xia exited the goddess's high-dimensional space with ease. Time passed slowly and night soon arrived. The surrounding environment was shrouded in darkness. The sound of singing and dancing could still be heard from the ancient castle not far away. Shedding her denim attire and donning Amazon armor, Thea prepared to participate in tonight's divine war as a female warrior. Drawing her silver moon longbow, moonlight occasionally filtered down its bow. Taking in the tranquility of the night sky, Thea prepared herself to face Ares with her full might. A commotion erupted within the castle as a cannonball suddenly unleashed, hurtling towards the village where Thea and her companions had been stationed. Originally, Thea had hesitated from her perch, debating whether to intercept the cannonball, but a conversation with the goddess slightly changed her mind. She understood that the villagers, inspired by her night dance with Diana, had developed a certain faith in them. She knew she would surely save them. This was the spiritual nourishment that would sustain her until she returned to her original timeline. Even if she was indifferent, she wouldn't risk her own life, would she? As for those who didn't believe in the goddess, Thea could only helplessly say, this was fate. They lacked the ability or courage to change themselves. They were destined to die here today. This involved a vast timeline issue. The villagers who worshipped the goddess were lucky, for she stood firm against the tectonic shifts of time. Thea's weak arms and legs couldn't save the rest. Knowing the god's gaze was upon them, she immediately realized the waters were too deep, and as a future person, it was best for her to stay out of the action. The clatter of hooves echoed through the quiet night sky. Diana, stripped of her disguise, rode a majestic steed. Galloping to the edge of the village. Facing the yellow, poisonous mist, she plunged in without hesitation. Chapter 235 Thea vs. Diana. Diana darted back and forth through the yellow toxic gas, her gaze filled with villagers prostrated on the ground. Men, women, young, and old, noble and humble, all fell on the land that had nurtured them. Was all this inevitable? Why didn't you stop it? Diana reached the central square and spotted a figure standing there. Overjoyed, she awoke to a loud question as she drew closer, realizing it was Thea silently watching her. Thea had been observing from a distance with the eye of Horus. She had expected Captain Steve to intervene, but the patriotic young man didn't even follow Diana. She knew her tireless efforts had tarnished Comrade Steve's reputation. Their friendship was now limited to a nod, and expecting him to persuade Diana for that small favor was a pipe dream. I still changed history. Thea couldn't tell whether she was happy or chagrined. Seeing Diana's figure lingering among the ruins, she knew she had no choice but to shoulder the blame. She calmly walked into the poisonous fog. As the air thinned, the concentration of the fog visibly dissipated. Having consumed the fruit gifted by the swamp monster, Thea wasn't immune to all poisons, but her resistance was incredibly high. Add to that the physical bonuses from her chosen one, and the already reduced concentration of the fog had no effect on her. Now, facing Diana's question, she could only express her opinion with silence. You could have stopped it. Diana, seeing her silence, grew increasingly angry and launched a punch. Thea, having jumped out now, knew she would face her wrath. Steve in the original timeline might have been nearly beaten, but Diana, perhaps considering his smaller size, ultimately spared him. Now that Thea had taken on that role, it wasn't so appealing. Any explanation now seemed pale and powerless. Thea wanted to see what Diana had become after leaving Paradise Island. Being a punching bag, simply taking the beating without fighting back would surely be more effective. Movies and TV series are full of this kind of plot, but Diana's power was too great. There might be a few strong men in the multiverse who could simply stand back and take a few blows from her without a hitch, but Thea's name certainly wasn't among them, at least not yet. Even before entering the poisonous fog, she had already imbued herself with a host of magical enhancements, giving her strength, speed, and endurance. Just in case, she had also equipped her right arm with a mechanical arm. Now, facing Diana's venomous punch, she threw it without holding back. With a muffled bang, the air at the point of their collision was crushed by the powerful force, even dispersing some of the poisonous fog. Diana merely took 2 steps back, while Thea was sent flying over 3 meters. She did a delicate somersault in midair, landing with a silver moon longbow in hand. A distant arrow shrouded in black mist shot out. "You missed." Diana deflected the arrow with her wrist guard. "How could that be, my knight?" Thea replied with a charming smile, but before she finished speaking, a cloud of black mist enveloped Diana. "Black mist again? This trick didn't work on me back on Paradise Island, have you forgotten?" Diana, unfazed by the mist, saw Thea unsheath her divine bow and drew her sword, discarding her shield, ready to face the incoming arrows. Instead of continuing her arrows, Thea drew a graceful incantation through the air with her right hand. Unleashing a 2-stage spell she had developed, Black Mist Immobilization, this spell, which had nearly given Oliver a nervous breakdown on Infernal Island, now possessed the Constantine family's notes and the added bonus of the Chosen Ones at night, had its power increased by 30%. Even Diana, with her divine form, was trapped for a second. An impressive spell, but that's all. Though a warrior demigod herself, Diana understood Thea's spellcasting principles from their many sparring matches. Seeing her stop firing, she immediately realized her mistake in remaining in the mist. With a powerful stomp of her feet, she leaped from the air, attempting to regain her familiar rhythm of battle. "I told you, jumping high when you can't turn in mid-air is foolish," Thea said jokingly, watching her landing point and avoiding her attack range. "Let me show you my latest research results." The 3rd stage, Black Mist Shadow Imitation, Thea's right hand kept aiming at Diana in the air. Mysterious spells flashed, and a dark mist visible to the naked eye formed around Diana. "What is this?" Diana didn't attack suddenly after landing. The two of them seemed to have returned to the carefree days of Paradise Island. "This is a 3rd-level spell, synthesized from my talent, the Chosen One, and a lot of other information. Come on, dear, try it." Thea didn't say this move was inspired by Gecko Mariah's shadow fruit. Black energy continued to emanate from Diana, merging with the shadows on the ground. In less than a second, a dark, faceless figure, the image of a girl holding a sword and shield, stood before Diana. Diana was startled when she suddenly saw a shadow that looked somewhat like herself standing in front of her, but she quickly calmed down, raised her shield, and prepared to face the next attack. Xia gave an order in her mind, and saw the black shadow slashing with a sword using the same martial arts as Diana. "Is this thing really my shadow?" As the battle lasted longer, Diana gradually calmed down. She also knew that these things were destined to happen and she couldn't blame Xia. She was just a little disadvantaged now, and her girlish pride made her not want to admit her mistake first. Xia had only developed this spell a few days ago and originally thought that she would have no chance to test it. Unexpectedly, Diana foolishly stayed in the black fog and refused to leave, which gave her the opportunity to continue. Of course. With the power of the goddess of the hunt, the black mist drained your divine power and mixed it with my magic, creating your shadow. Now, what do you think of this fellow with the same skills as you? How close are they to your level? Thea carefully observed the effects of the spell, but she continued her attacks. Using the shadow to hold Diana at bay, she combined her magic and archery skills, launching a barrage of magical arrows, rockets, wind arrows, and light arrows at Diana. Diana was speechless. Unwilling to withstand Thea's volleys, she repeatedly tried to circumvent the shadow and reach the real target. However, the shadow's martial arts were identical to hers, and the two clashed swords and shields, with no clear winner for a moment. Furthermore, the shadow had drained their divine power, adding and subtracting it. After over 30 moves, Diana still couldn't defeat the imposter. What a fascinating match, Diana of Paradise Island, and this one, Artemis's Chosen One, right? Could you two please hold off for a moment? Just as Diana was gaining the upper hand and the shadow was on the verge of defeat, a lame old man emerged from the poisonous mist. Chapter 236, Old Man, you think too much, I'm just passing by. Ares. Oh my. How did he jump out so early? Thea's magic power was somewhat depleted, and she reversed course to cancel Diana's shadow, returning some of her divine power and her own. Seeing that he showed no sign of attacking immediately, Thea hurried to Diana's side. There was no conflict between them, just a minor temper. With such a formidable enemy at hand, it felt safest to be with DC's top defense warrior. How did he get in? Diana naturally wouldn't draw her sword against Thea. They had a tacit understanding, a kind of quarrelsome, reconciled relationship. Seeing Ares staggering in, she was stunned. The poisonous fog enveloping the village had dissipated somewhat due to their battle, but at most it had turned from dark yellow to pale yellow. How did such a lame old man get in? Thea wondered, was he no longer disguising himself? He just swaggered in like that. Why was he pretending to be lame if he could even come in? Was he just getting too caught up in the act? Now that the gods had blocked the view of his true form, nothing Thea said mattered. But thinking of the universal truth that villains die because they talk too much, he swallowed a truth that was on the tip of his tongue. Ares was still feigning limpness. Was he trying to use his verbal tricks? If he wanted to say it, then let him do it. It would be a good way to replenish the mana he'd spent. The last shadow mimicry spell had consumed quite a bit. For a moment, Thea remained silent, clutching the divine bow tightly, feigning nervousness. Unbelievably, Thea's prudence had stunned Ares. He hadn't paid any attention to Thea at first, but the brief exchange between them had drawn him in. Combining all the evidence at the scene, he had a pretty good idea of who was behind Diana. This guy following Diana was no unknown individual. Especially after seeing Thea and Diana's fistfight. This newcomer had actually been able to block Diana's furious blow. His strength far exceeded the limits of both ordinary humans and Amazons. While still far behind him, he was definitely a formidable force for ordinary people. Especially after seeing Thea's silver moon longbow, Ares instantly recognized her identity as the Chosen One. The position of Chosen One was not for ordinary people. Even in the days of the gods, the most basic qualification for a Chosen One was to be a hero recognized by all tribes. Only the most outstanding humans were eligible to compete for the position. Young ladies, I am your friend Sir Patrick Morgan. We met in London. Although Ares looked up to Thea, his divine arrogance shifted his focus to Diana. He smiled and tipped his hat with a gentlemanly gesture. You are not mortal? Could it be that you're Ares? You have always been with us. Diana was already highly intelligent, and combined with Thea's expression of fear, it would have been a miracle if she hadn't seen the obvious. You are the one who killed all these villagers. Diana's rage finally found an outlet, and she surged with divine power, pressing down on Ares with astonishing force. Was this the legendary explosive power? Although Diana's primary target was Ares, the aftermath of the aura still sent shockwaves in all directions. Thea quickly cast an air shield, blocking most of the aftermath. She withstood the rest with her body, managing to stay put without moving, managing to avoid embarrassment. She nearly embarrassed herself, and Ares, facing the sheer might of the aura, was also caught off guard, his hat instantly blown away. However, as a veteran god of war, Ares' reputation was well deserved. Though his true form was now dormant, and the one that confronted the two women was only a puny clone, his might remained undiminished. His eyes flashed with ferocity, his feet firmly planted on the ground, enduring the overwhelming force. Anyone could tell he was in trouble, and Ares dropped his prudence. His back was no longer bent, his legs no longer lame. With his hands behind his back, he stood like a javelin, his small stature a monument to the earth. With extraordinary audacity, Thea admitted she hadn't discerned his true strength back in London, grossly underestimating his power. His disguise consisted of 7 layers, and with each deeper glimpse, she'd assumed she'd grasped his true strength. In reality, it was all camouflage. Thea had only seen the 4th or 5th layer, still a long way from Ares' true power. But this was truly thrilling. Though she lacked the breathtaking magical power she'd experienced in the fierce battle with Horus, she was no longer alone. With Diana by her side, all she had to do was deliver with ease. Thea pulled out her skateboard, deatomized it, and soared upward, hovering 3 meters in the air. Drawing her bow and arrow, she aimed at Ares from afar. She could fly using her own magic, but it was a laborious task. In terms of speed and agility, her current flight abilities were far inferior to the control she could achieve with her skateboard. Ares' discerning eye was truly piercing. He immediately discerned a great deal from Thea. He saw the original mechanical arm, a gleaming silver, devoid of any magical energy. He initially thought it was some kind of female ornament, like women in the East who wore numerous gold rings around their necks. He assumed it was just some kind of custom, and didn't think much of it. But now, Thea's skateboard surprised him. Having spent so many years in human society, He knew whether human technology could fly. This skateboard had no wings and no fuel. If you told Ares it was a modern-day invention, he'd have to believe it. An answer dawned on him, and Ares turned to look at Thea, who was staring at him. "Chosen of Artemis, are you from the future?" Thea, waiting for Diana to start a monster attack, didn't bother to engage in conversation, neither nodding nor shaking her head. An Amazon from the future, Ares observed Diana, constantly studying her. "So I'm going to win today? You came from the future to prevent this from happening." The more Ares spoke, the more convinced he was that he was right. That was the only way to explain Thea's appearance here. It seemed fate was on his side. "I could win this time." He didn't shy away from the two of them when he spoke these words, speaking frankly and openly, perhaps with the intention of exerting psychological pressure. Diana had indeed been fooled, and looked at Thea anxiously. "I was just passing by," Thea explained sheepishly, but the two simply didn't believe her. Honestly, she admired the war god's circuitry. How had he deduced the illusion that he could win? But after careful consideration, Ares' analysis made some sense. How had he gotten here? The gods were so numerous and complex in their subtle movements that Thea wasn't sure if she had just happened to pass by. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 237. Is this a real sword or a fake sword? Diana, my sister, you see. Fate has already foretold your defeat today. Why not join forces with me? With our combined strength, we can completely transform this dark world. Isn't that what you've always dreamed of? Ares' confidence was unprecedentedly high. He had originally been 60% confident in today's duel, but after understanding Thea's intentions, his confidence skyrocketed to 90%. I'm not your sister. Perhaps humanity has its imperfections, and the greed of those in power among them isn't worth my help. Diana's words brought a hint of joy to Ares' eyes, but his next words caused his expression to darken. But I am Diana. I have received the god's blessing, and my mission is to protect humanity. Although I haven't yet found my true heart, this is what my mother and everyone else hope for me. Diana glanced at Thea, their eyes meeting in midair, each understanding the other's intentions. I will not let them down. For the innocents in this war, evil gods, today is your death. Diana stomped her feet firmly onto the ground, swiftly charging towards Ares. Thea also timely activated her chosen talent, Eternal Night. The already pitch-black night now darkened even further. A ball of pure shadow energy, transformed into thick ink, clung to Ares and began to madly erode his divine power. His divine power flickered rapidly. Although he eventually managed to stabilize the situation, the radiance of his power inevitably dimmed. Such a bizarre talent. Ares was a little frustrated. He was also a god, and he had chosen people in the past. The talents upgraded by powerful humans were all kinds of different. He had originally thought that Thea was one of Artemis's chosen people, most likely talents like archery and hunting, but he hadn't expected this debuffing talent. Seeing Diana and Thea's divine power and magic surge, while his own power decreased slightly, and reflecting on Artemis's teachings, he finally understood the mechanics of this talent. It was a discriminatory spell that weakened all men within its range, while strengthening women. Thea was brimming with pride, about to boast a bit, when she suddenly realized a serious problem and nearly bit her tongue. Diana, benefiting from her buff, suddenly increased her speed by another 30%. Like a tiger descending from a mountain, she rushed over to Ares and slashed down with her sword. Sister. That sword is fake. Is it too late for me to say it now? Thea watched in amazement as the blade edged ever closer to Ares' head, nearly cursing Hippolyta inwardly. That old woman is such a ripoff. Fortunately, things didn't go as she expected. Ares was affected by her strange barrier. Although his divine power partially mitigated the damage, his strength still dropped by 15%. Meanwhile, Diana's strength increased by a solid 30%. With one gain and one loss, their strengths were instantly evened, and Ares' original 90% chance of victory returned to 60%. Facing Diana's powerful blow, he dared not take it head-on. Without moving his shoulders or legs, he retreated 3 meters, as if being dragged from behind, dodging the blow that could have changed the outcome of the battle. Thea wanted to warn Diana that there was something wrong with the Godslayer sword. But Ares chose to dodge instead of taking it head-on, which made her words come back to her lips. Ares was a true god of war, his vision surely far superior to hers. Her belief that the sword was flawed was merely based on a preconceived notion of the plot. What if the plot turned out differently, and she told Diana to throw away the real Godslayer sword? Would that be a mistake? She had no time to think. Diana and Ares had already engaged in close combat, and Thea could only continuously support her with various magic arrows. Less than 3 minutes into the battle, Ares felt deeply frustrated. It wasn't that he lacked combat power, but rather that the two women on the opposite side worked so well together, complementing each other perfectly. He was about to launch himself into battle when Thea flung a gravity spell, pulling him back. Diana followed with a shield slam. He attempted to manipulate the surrounding buildings to engulf them, but Thea's constant barrage of magic interrupted his flow, preventing him from even casting the spell. After dodging Diana's gleaming sword several times, he found a moment to summon a warrior from the Divine Kingdom. Although he knew a female warrior would be best in the stammed barrier, the god of war was a discriminatory priesthood, and his female warriors were as rare as pandas. He had no choice but to find a male warrior, not one he could use much, just one to hold Thea back. Unfortunately, Thea had been poring over the Constantine family's magic book, which contains nearly half a volume devoted to summoning and unsummoning magic. Seeing Ares' intention to summon, Thea simply cast a banish spell without thinking. The poor male warrior barely took a step before being sent back down again. Oh my! Ares was so irritated. He was a god of war, not magic. While he could master a few high-level spells by analogy, Diana pressed him relentlessly, giving him no time to unleash them. He did have time to unleash low-level spells, but his initial expectations were too high, and he knew very few. The few he managed were either destroyed or interrupted by Thea, leaving him in a state of panic. Thea's interruptions were successful, but her damage output was equally formidable. Using her artifact longbow, she continuously hurled arrows imbued with both dark and light energy at Ares. Using her skateboard's superior maneuverability, she constantly darted forward, backward, and left Ares with many of her arrows at such a tricky angle that Ares had no choice but to absorb them. Magical arrows, unlike traditional arrows, transformed into pure energy upon impact, entering the target's body. Thea's attribute energies were numerous and refined: light, dark, fire, wind, and several other energies constantly converged within Ares, creating small explosions from time to time. Inevitably, Ares' divine power began to malfunction, and Diana struck him with several more shield strikes. Ares, the god of war, possessed immense experience. He could estimate that his own divine power consumption far outstripped that of the two opponents. He knew that if he continued this way, he would be beaten to death. He pointed a finger at Thea from a distance, and a wave of green light shot out. What was this? Thea felt the green energy was violent and resolute, and it didn't resemble a natural spell at all. She didn't dare to take it head-on, relying on the excellent mobility of her skateboard to evade it. Ares seized this golden opportunity and delivered a powerful punch, knocking Diana back. It's time for you to witness the fundamental difference between the gods and you. Chapter 238, Questions about the Sword, Waiting Online, Urgent. Ares completely shed his mortal disguise. Armor continuously emerged from the void, responding to his call: arm guards, chest guards, leg guards. Once the horned helmet was donned, the hypocritical Sir Cripple vanished, replaced by the god of war, a symbol of conquest and slaughter. Countless images of war floated around him: the Battle of Thermopylae, Saladin's war with the Christians, and even the First World War. Countless heroes were drawn to the battlefields, some achieving glory, while many more lost their lives. Thea's gaze was captivated by the various visions. Fortunately, she had now embarked on a divine path, and the power emanating from her war priesthood wasn't directed at anyone. She shook her head, dismissing the visions. This guy is quite powerful. Thea was overwhelmed by the astonishing aura Ares radiated, but now her perspective had broadened considerably. She quickly regained her fighting spirit and turned to look at Diana. Diana was indeed far superior to Thea in terms of life force. Though she was intimidated by the pressure of her priesthood, her gaze froze for a moment before returning to normal. Do you think this is my true power? You're wrong. Haha, Ares roared with laughter, then doubled, then quadrupled, ultimately transforming into 7 fully armored Ares, each wielding a weapon: a sword, a rapier, a great axe, a warhammer. You Amazonian wizard over there, Do you have any way to counter this? This is the power of a god. Put away your ridiculous magic. Haha, it was clear Ares had a terrible impression of Thea. He even brushed aside Diana, the real one, and began to sneer at Thea. Oh my. Thea was no longer the paranoid young woman from Star City. As her strength grew, so did her temper. The Ares in front of him only managed to suppress the two women with his wielding of the war priesthood, but after all, he wasn't incarnated in his true form, and his power was far inferior to that of Horus. What's so great about divine power? Thea muttered softly. I have it too. She channeled the wisp of divine power within her into the eye of Horus, unleashing the might of the eagle god. The entire universe was illuminated, and a mystical divine light swept across the group of Ares. What? Before Ares could comprehend what was happening, he saw 6 clones, created by divine power, vanish into thin air under the divine light. Only Ares himself remained, posing foolishly with 2 long swords. This isn't the power of the Greek pantheon. Thea's glance stunned Ares. He had initially assumed it was a civil war within the Greek pantheon, and he had never imagined that Thea possessed other divine powers. Although the Egyptian pantheon was currently at odds with Thea, and the number of festivals was increasing, she still had to say that the Egyptian gods were relatively responsible. Take Horus, for example. Every day, he would transform into an eagle, patrolling the lands. Seeing injustice, he would ascend to judge in the name of the god Ra. They could be considered a group of responsible gods. In contrast, their close neighbors, the Greek pantheon, were completely different. Lord Zeus had failed to set a good example. He blissfully transformed himself into a giant black bull, flirting with young ladies. Even the king of gods behaved like this, while his subordinates indulged themselves in irresponsible play. The sheer amount of knowledge Artemis imparted to Thea about winemaking underscored their lack of commitment. While they possessed numerous duties related to singing, dancing, eating, drinking, and pleasure, they possessed few, if any, combat-related abilities like the ability to break illusions and see. While Ares' single-handed defeat of a vast horde of gods certainly stemmed from a sudden attack, it also had much to do with the Greek pantheon's lack of combat prowess. Now, with Thea's sudden glance, his ultimate attack was instantly shattered, leaving the god of war somewhat unsettled. These 6 were no illusions, but actual clones, their armor and weapons expended upon him, the divine power he had painstakingly accumulated over years in human society. While the other gods were estimated to be largely unscathed, his own divine power had vanished by a factor of half. Ares was furious. He was never a broad-minded god, and now, facing Thea's repeated offenses, he could no longer bear it. He threw the 2 swords in his hands at Diana, and reluctantly expended his divine power to transform the 2 weapons into 2 tall and burly barbarian warriors. He mentally ordered that he would not kill them, as long as the 2 barbarian warriors could hold Diana for a while. You rejoice. Your humble life has the honor of being harvested by the god of war himself today. Ares pulled out a blood-red spear from the void and rushed towards Thea in the sky at lightning speed. Holy shit. I'm out. Aren't you and Diana a mortal enemy? Why are you picking on me? This script shouldn't be like this. Glancing in Diana's direction, Thea saw 2 barbarian warriors entangled her, and Diana couldn't fly. Facing Ares, whose eyes were now red with anger, Thea turned and ran. What a joke. She didn't have the magical power of centuries to build up, and she was just a fragile archer with far less defense than Diana. How could she possibly survive being stabbed by his menacing spear? No question, run. Of course, she wasn't just running blindly. Thea weaved through the air, constantly using the village buildings as obstacles to slow Ares. But Ares, possessing the memories of his original form, possessed perfect flight abilities, and his mid-air acceleration and turning speed were comparable to Thea's, if not superior. Seeing that kiting wasn't working, Thea could only sprint towards Diana, desperate to draw the defenders back into her aggro. However, Ares saw through her subtle plan and repeatedly intercepted her path. In just 10 seconds, Thea was repeatedly in danger. The situation was dire, forcing Thea to deploy one of her trump cards. A shadow clone of Yinwen descended to the ground and sped off into the distance. Just a trick. Ares, though not as expert as Horus, possessed the basic ability to break illusions as the god of war. He ignored Thea's clone and continued relentlessly pursuing the original. This was no mere trick. Thea hadn't expected a single clone to deceive a true god. Her goal was a 2-on-1 battle. Due to the sudden drop in the original's magic power, the clone's self-awareness had also declined, appearing far less agile than before. However, she could skillfully wield Thea's spells, and the Eternal Night also provided a magical bonus. Various weakening spells rained down on Ares, while Thea constantly controlled her skateboard to flee while turning back and bombarding Ares with magic arrows. Go! Diana, in the distance, seemed to sense the dire situation and threw something from a distance. Thea fired another explosive arrow, forcing Ares back. Knowing Diana wouldn't harm her, she grabbed the arrow and was stunned by the sight. Isn't this the god-slaying sword? Diana definitely means well, but at this moment, Thea really wants to grab Hippolyta by the neck and ask, is this sword real or fake? Waiting online, it's urgent. Chapter 239 Shadow Maze. Thea stared at the gleaming mighty sword in her hand. She knew her complaints against Hippolyta were futile, for Ares, taking advantage of her moment to strike, attacked again. They were too close, and it was too late to draw her bow and arrow. Facing Ares' wielding spear with such ferocity, she could only muster her nerves. In the blink of an eye, Thea dodged 4 or 5 attacks. Ares seemed suspicious of her dodging and lack of counterattack, suspecting she was plotting something, so he held back somewhat. However, the gap between their martial prowess was immense. Ares' role as the god of war fused the essence of countless warriors from ancient and modern times, both Chinese and foreign. Even without the added factor of divine power, in a pure contest of martial arts, Thea's mere 2 years of training couldn't match the combined might of countless warriors. Even summoning a ninja master to duel with him would still result in a loss, let alone Thea. Seeing that Thea's move was wearing out, Ares thrust a spear directly at her. Desperate, Thea could only parry with her sword. She'd resolved to immediately swap places with her shadow clone on the ground if her sword shattered. She wouldn't resort to this move unless absolutely necessary. The shadow clone's sacrifice was trivial, summoned with a minimal expenditure of energy. But without the aid of her skateboard, she couldn't outrun Ares. With a crisp clang, the sword and spear collided. Though Thea's power was suppressed to the extreme, the sword remained intact, unbroken. Was this the real god-slaying sword? Thea was now completely bewildered by the original plot. Why had Ares shattered Diana's wield with a single hand, yet she was fine when she used it? She didn't believe Thea was destined to be the protagonist, she only knew there was a hidden secret she didn't know. With a sense of trepidation, they exchanged a few more blows. The sword held its own, and even a faint sense of joy emanated from its blade. What was going on? Thea had asked Diana before, but she didn't sense any emotion from the sword. While the sword wouldn't shatter into pieces for a while, allowing Thea to fully unleash her martial arts skills, her moves were still far inferior to Ares's. Although Ares didn't know whether the sword was real or fake, seeing Thea begin to fight back, he knew he'd misjudged her and that she had no real plans. Abandoning all concerns, Ares launched a swift and powerful attack, leaving Thea in agony. He considered sending his clone to help Diana deal with the 2 barbarian warriors before coming to her aid. But Ares' attacks were faster than the last, and without the clone's support, Thea wouldn't last more than 30 moves. He barely blocked Ares' sweeping blows, and with the help of Ares' immense power, Thea finally gained distance. Fander. Buy me some time. Thea aimed her right hand at Ares and released the elk from her ring. The elk was incredibly experienced in combat, needing no further instruction. It enlarged and charged in an instant, its sharp antlers bearing down on Ares as it raced for miles. Thea hovered above the ground, facing her clone, preparing to unleash a spell far beyond her current capabilities, Shadow Labyrinth. Her original form began to chant the spell softly, while her clone continuously gathered energy and carved the spell patterns. This spell drew upon the Chosen One's innate abilities. Aided by the yin-patterned clone's assistance and the magical arrows of the artifact longbow. Finally, amidst the elk's cries of exhaustion, Thea completed the spell. Casting the spell had nearly depleted her mana, and she retracted her clone, finally regaining some mobility. She attached the formed magic to the arrow, sensed the elk's position, opened the Eye of Horus, and saw Ares approaching at a rapid speed. She pointed her bow at an angle toward the sky, aimed at Ares from afar, and shot. She used the technique of a light arrow, firing at near instantaneous speed. Using the divine power of the Eye of Horus to correct the arrow, it pierced Ares' heart. Ares, a god after all, possessed immense experience in battle. He hadn't expected Thea's arrow to be so fast. He only realized the arrow's speed when it reached him. The intense friction between the arrow's shadow energy and the air almost struck lightning. He could easily grasp the danger of the arrow. Drawing on countless years of combat instinct, he instinctively stepped to the side. This magical arrow, representing Thea's current peak level, pierced his chest through his right breastplate. Nothing more than that. Ugh, what a thing. Eris was indeed severely injured, but his pride wouldn't allow him to be defeated by a mortal. He roared, not wanting to lose the battle. But before he could finish, a ball of dark shadowy energy enveloped him, seemingly dragging him somewhere. This was a high-level spell. Although Ares had never seen it before, he could tell by the energy level. This thing definitely wasn't sucking him in to treat him to a meal, so he began to struggle. If you were in good condition, even a spell of this level wouldn't have been able to harm him. There was a natural chasm between gods and humans. But he was only a clone now, and divine power was a rootless source. The more he used, the less he had. After being suppressed by Thea's talent and tossed around by her several times, his divine power had been depleted by 20%. Considering he still had to deal with Diana, who was almost at full strength, Eris hesitated for a moment. The elk, having fought with a goddess for many years, was very experienced in combat, or rather, very cunning. Sensing Ares's hesitation, she took a few quick steps and, under Ares' furious gaze, pushed him forward. Go support Diana, Thea mentally instructed the elk. She was now weakly recovering her magic. Ares was only temporarily trapped. With his abilities, he could undoubtedly escape the Shadow Labyrinth. It was just a matter of time. Diana would definitely be the primary force in the ensuing battle. Diana was initially terrified, but she hadn't realized her limitations until the situation became critical. First, she couldn't fly, which was why she was entangled by those two musclemen. Second, she lacked powerful moves. Although her shield smacked the two barbarian warriors' faces, it wasn't much of a stunt. Now, with the elk's support, she quickly escaped the predicament. She drew her lasso of truth, ensnared the two men, and slammed them to the ground, until they vanished in white smoke. Finally, she felt a sense of relief, remembering Thea hurriedly running to her side. Are you okay? Seeing Diana ask herself before Ares, Thea felt happy. What did this mean? It meant the strategy was successful, but she also knew now was not the time to tease. Ares could come out at any moment. Thea wanted to return the Godslayer sword to Diana. But Diana waved her hand. The sword asked me to give it to you. It shows you. You are its true master. Chapter 240 Ares Helper. What? The fake sword recognized me as its master? Thea carefully examined the sword, which still glowed golden. She had no idea what its power or effects were, but it looked absolutely stunning. Seeing Thea examining the sword, Diana remembered Ares and nudged her with her elbow. Hey, where's Ares? Wasn't that a fateful battle? I've waited 5,000 years to deal with him, and all I did was smite two musclemen. The real master wasn't even dealt 2 blows, and he's gone? He's trapped by my spell. With his abilities, he'll definitely come out. It's just that time flows differently inside and outside, and I'm also, you're dead. Before she could finish her words, a blood-red halo flashed, and Ares leaped out with 2 great swords in hand. Under the cover of night, Thea had the Chosen One's natural ability to avoid surprise attacks, and she had been on guard against him for a long time, so she didn't hesitate and leaped out of the way. Diana was filled with rage. Seeing Ares jump out, she threw her shield without a second thought. With a muffled pop, Ares was flung back over 5 meters. Huh? As someone who had been chased by him for over 10 minutes, Thea was the most qualified person to speak about Ares' strength. This guy seemed to have weakened a lot. But before she could think about it, a dark gray, leather-armored, minotaur-headed monster, holding a large axe, jumped out from the red halo, following Ares closely. Minotaur, come, join me in attacking the flying one. Ares, as always, ignored Diana, ready to kill Thea first. Just as Thea took off to dodge the attack, the Minotaur whispered in a voice completely inconsistent with his image, why? We're sending you out of the maze. Complete our mission, yell. The creature's voice was weak as it opened, and Thea realized it was actually a cow. Ares had clearly put considerable thought into dealing with her, but it seemed this summoned creature wasn't on the same page. As expected, Ares nearly fainted from the cow's words. His appearance was far from positive. His helmet was gone, burns were visible on the left side of his face, and his armor was severely damaged. The damage done to him by the previous maze spell was far greater than Thea had imagined. Originally, this spell required a mage to construct a maze with their own magic power, The higher the intelligence and the deeper the magic power, the larger the maze. The spell Thea inherited was more divine than magic. The crucial maze construction, the goddess had already constructed it, without her having to worry about it. Of course, the goddess hadn't built it specifically for Thea, it was a shared space for all of the goddess's chosen and higher-ranking priests. Because it had been constructed by the goddess herself, it fully embodied several characteristics of divine power, vast, wide, and deep. The goddess treated the followers under her care with remarkable kindness. Whenever a follower encountered an enemy they couldn't defeat, they could simply throw it into her divine realm. The goddess would then draw the enemy into her divine realm, where she could personally deal with it. Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, was known for her restless nature among the Greek pantheon, often wandering the multiverse. Whenever she saw a small animal with a curious skeleton, she would toss it into the dimensional world, waiting for her time to slowly train it. In her prime, a small animal for the goddess certainly wasn't something like a bunny or a kitten. Unfortunately, this goddess was a bit forgetful, and Ragnarok arrived rather hastily. The powerful monsters in the dimensional world were left unchecked, multiplying and growing in number. As Ares was being drawn into the maze, he happened to encounter 3 small animals, 3 black dragons, known for their fiery tempers. The father dragon, led by him, was a full 100 meters long. In a cave, Father Dragon was teaching young Master Dragon hunting techniques when a cloud of black mist flashed by, and Ares was flung out, spear in hand. Father Dragon barely even saw the newcomer's face before he erupted in a blaze of flames. Mother Dragon and young Master Dragon followed closely behind, their claws and fangs lashing out at Ares. Poor old cripple Ares, fresh from having a massive hole punched through his chest by Thea, was then sucked into the stemmed dimension. The tunnel had been in disrepair for so long that he stumbled and was thrown out, only to be robbed by a family of 3. Ares was furious. Feeling like a fallen tiger being bullied by a dog, he had no time to repair himself. He discarded his spear, replacing it with 2 greatswords, and engaged in a bloody battle with a family of 3, hacking left and right. After leaving Thea's discriminatory barrier, his strength somewhat recovered. With his superb martial arts and divine power, he finally cut the family of 3 into 18 pieces, albeit with only minor injuries. It's unclear whether he mistook the dragons for Thea, but he finally felt relieved. As he surveyed his surroundings, he realized he had no idea where he was. While he possessed the memories of his former self as the god of war, his former self was a pure warrior deity. The few advanced spells he had learned in his later years were things like earthquakes and meteorites. He despised the maze-like spells before him, it was the first time he had seen them. Silently channeling his divine power, he mostly recovered the damage. After examining his body, he felt a pang of bitterness, only 60% of his divine power remained. As he fought off a school of flying fish and a lion the size of a mountain, he finally understood the principle behind the spell. It's just a maze. What's so great about it? He was unaware that his former self's vision had been blocked by the gods. He tried to contact his former self several times, but received no response. In desperation, he could only use his divine power to summon the descendants of Minos from Hades, a kingdom he had been relatively friendly with but had been excluded from the 12 gods. Using their racial talents, he escaped the maze. To teach Thea a lesson she would never forget, he even selected a cow. However, he guessed the beginning, not the end. The cow, seemingly docile, turned out to be a tough nut, clearly refusing to participate in the battle. How dare you betray me? Ares hadn't had a good day, and now he felt like his eyes were about to explode, all because of these guys. The cow rolled her eyes nonchalantly, carrying her axe and ignoring Ares. Ares was furious, but he had no way to control the cow. Hades was the boss, and she was only following him to help. After struggling to repel Diana, he was now once again enveloped by Thea's barrier. His own strength was less than 50% of what it had been at the beginning. He had originally had a good chance of winning the battle. But in the end, his divine power was wasted in inexplicable places. Now, he could no longer defeat Diana on his own, and could only use his rich combat skills to stabilize the situation. Ares pondered over it, and this swaying cow turned out to be his only means of victory. He dodged Thea's magic arrows and used his skilled combat skills to throw Diana far away. He stood there in a daze for a few seconds, and when he regained consciousness, a golden contract appeared in his hand, which he raised towards the cow. Hades' contract. As long as you help me defeat them, you will be completely free. Chapter 241 The Helper Who Lost His Chains. The heifer pondered for a few seconds, then nodded cheerfully. Okay, I agree. As she finished speaking, the golden contract in Ares' hand dissipated into golden dust, dispersing in the wind. You're dead. Ares didn't even glance at Diana, his lifelong enemy, and charged at Thea with two swords raised, his face stern. The heifer, with a hint of slyness in her voice, joined in the pursuit, axe in hand. Thea stared into Ares' crimson eyes, feeling helpless. How had things come to this? Facing the two men's aggressive power, she dared not fight back. Ares had indeed expended half his divine power, but she had consumed far more. She had no choice but to resort to the old-fashioned method, keep running. To care for Diana, who couldn't yet fly, Thea chose to fly close to the ground. The scene became extremely ugly. The four men, working in pairs, were moving in a straight line. Thea ran ahead, occasionally turning back to fire a few arrows. Diana ran behind her, shielding her from various weapons. Ares and the heifer ignored Diana and slashed at Thea. Such an ugly fight filled the god of war, Ares with shame. He kept scolding Thea, urging her to stop and fight him. How foolish Thea must be to challenge him in a duel. She acted as if she hadn't heard him, leading this strange group in irregular circles around the village. Inspired by his challenge, Diana also demanded that Ares stop and fight her, lecturing her on national traditions and the rules of divine warfare. But Ares' strength was now halved, and he had no hope of defeating Diana, who had barely expended any energy. He could only imitate Thea and pretend not to hear. In ancient warfare, attacking an opponent's mount was a deeply humiliating act. But Ares, driven to catch up to Thea, abandoned his warlike dignity and attacked her skateboard like crazy. Unfortunately, Thea had mastered the skill of manipulating it, swiftly and nimbly shifting speeds and heights, rendering Ares' attacks futile. For the sake of his remaining dignity, Ares abandoned the skateboard and continued to pursue her. As they circled the village for the fifth time, the heifer burst into laughter, a radiant laugh. What are you laughing at? Are you even serious about chasing? You should be faster in the stam barrier. Ares' forehead was smoldering. Needless to say, he was furious. Seeing the heifer enjoying herself like a game, Ares immediately launched into a furious barrage. The heifer glared innocently and launched two more axe strikes at Thea, both blocked by the nimble Diana. The heifer winked at Ares, implying, "Did you see that? I tried my best, but that's all I can do." Her perfunctory attitude made Ares' eyes blaze with stars. At least he remembered her as his helper, otherwise, with his usual temper, he would have chopped her to pieces. Thea noticed a cow's passive attitude and silently cast a spell on the arrow. "Diana, get out of the way." Instantly, Thea swiftly fired a stream of earth-yellow magic arrows at the ground, creating a massive crater in the path behind them. Diana took her cue and dodged with a powerful leap. Ares, experienced in combat and familiar with several of Thea's attack methods, saw her shoot towards the ground and took flight without a second thought. There was a loud thud. "Ouch! I've fallen into the pit. I can't get out, Lord Ares. I failed you." The little cow dramatically leaped into the pit, exchanging a knowing glance with Thea. She screamed, her voice deafening, and uttered nothing more. Unable to contain his rage, Ares cursed for a long time in the divine language, but realizing no one understood, he switched back to English. But his rants couldn't change the facts. Without the little cow to block his advance, Thea sent out her elk to block the attack, successfully stopping it. Then, she scurried out of range, leaving Ares with only Diana, equally furious. "Alice." Thea ran a long way, then looked back to see Ares hadn't caught up. She patted her chest with a sigh of relief. Being pursued and attacked by a furious god of war would be a fatal blow for anyone. Fortunately, she managed to escape the furious god with her flexible tactics. But she didn't rest much. Thea knew Diana had ample defenses but no powerful offensive means. She wanted to return the God-Slayer sword to her, but the sword's will was so strong that it refused to return to Diana's hands, intensifying her curiosity about the sword. She estimated that she had recovered about 40% of her magic power from the chase and fight. She summoned her clone again, asking her to provide magical support while her main body retrieved the only two crimson arrows of revenge from Zeus's quiver. This arrow was particularly effective against guilty women, but it could also be used as a normal arrow. Artemis' definition of revenge was that no matter how hard someone hits you, you must strike back. Thea smirked darkly. "Ares, you bastard, you made me chase you so hard just now. You should pay the price. The arrow was now swirling with a thick layer of divine power. This wasn't Thea's own power, but rather Ares' attack, transformed by the principles of revenge. Deriving from the same source as Ares' divine power, it possessed a guaranteed hit. Without aiming, Thea fired straight into the sky. The arrow automatically deflected mid-air and hurtled towards Ares, who was still engaged in a fierce battle with Diana. Divine arrow, Ares' eyes remained focused. He knew the moon goddess's two arrows, and now, seeing this one hurtling straight at him, its characteristics and properties raced through his mind. Damn! This was unlike the previous magical arrows. His body couldn't withstand this divine arrow. This one could definitely kill him. Ares hadn't expected Thea to have hidden this arrow. Now, its divine power was so intense, it shot towards him with deadly force. Fortunately, Artemis's two arrows had been used so often that the gods had developed some countermeasures. Ares no longer hesitated, and at the moment the arrow approached, he created a clone possessing 30% of his own divine power. The arrow hesitated for a moment, believing the one with the most divine power was the original. It made a sharp turn before Ares' eyes and charged towards the clone, catching up with him after the clone had taken just 2 steps. The violent explosion of divine power struck both Diana and Ares. Diana, clad in divine armor and in perfect condition, and with her shield blocking most of the impact, she watched the enemy with unconcern. Ares' situation was faring worse. The explosion struck directly to his side, and with no defensive gear and a slight disadvantage, he was instantly blown away. Climbing out of the dust pile, he felt utterly devastated. The divine power he had accumulated for years in human society was now reduced to only 15% of its original value. What was he even doing? Run. Chapter 242, Fierce Battle. Ideals are beautiful, but reality is cruel. Although veteran Ares was preparing for a strategic retreat, the younger fighters showed no sign of letting him go. Diana, who had barely expended herself since the start of the battle, easily caught up with him. Her lasso of truth instantly activated, wrapping around Ares' ankle and pulling him back. Ares' divine power was now at its lowest point, his attributes completely suppressed by Diana. He had no energy left to break free from the lasso of truth. He could only exploit Diana's pull, hoping to repel Diana and regain distance. Bang! Despite some mental preparation, Ares felt a deep sense of fear when his full-strength punch was firmly caught by Diana. Diana caught Ares' powerful blow with her right hand, sending her back a small step, but she remained steady, her eyes gleaming, and the protective silver bracelet on her arm began to emit a flicker of light. Diana felt her own power growing by the second. This surge of power needed an outlet, and what better punching bag than Ares? I'll let you harm others. I'll let you start a war. You evil god. Diana clutched the lasso of truth in one hand, retrieving Ares whenever he tried to escape. With her other hand, she clenched her fist and struck him down. You know nothing. I didn't do that. Ares initially disdained explanation, but as the protective silver bracelet gradually awakened, this artifact, Diana's 5,000 years old, began to unleash its power. Diana's punches intensified, her power nearly boundless. Ares could barely withstand a few blows at first, but his subsequent counterattacks were completely crushed. Faced with this unwarranted accusation, Ares felt he couldn't win, but he refused to admit defeat. Perhaps, with the upper hand, he could boast, I'm responsible for all the evil in the world. Bite me if you dare, but now, beaten like a dead dog, he no longer had the will to show off. All he felt was a deep sense of resentment. Damn it. What does humanity's war have to do with me? Facing Diana's relentless blows, Ares felt as if he were engulfed in flames. He felt anger at his own weakness, and also rage at the world's slander. He was a supreme god, and he refused to acknowledge any of this. I refuse to accept. I haven't lost yet, so don't even think of insulting me. Ares' nearly depleted divine power miraculously revived slightly due to his intense rage. But as with everything in the world, what you gain comes with what you lose. He gained new power, but at a heavy price, his sanity. Facing Diana's punch to the face, he only slightly avoided the vital points, completely abandoning defense and punching Diana in return. Diana's attack had already been launched, and in the split second it took to retract, her shield and silver bracelet completely useless. She could only temporarily use her divine power to shield herself, taking Ares' furious blow head-on. Their attacks collided simultaneously, and Ares, empowered by the silver bracelet, grew increasingly powerful. Diana shattered the left side of his body, sending him flying backward 100 meters into the mud. Diana fared much better, her divine power more abundant. Furthermore, her armor, while not as defensive as a shield, was still a divine weapon. Ares' attack was only a minor injury, and she retreated a dozen meters before stopping. But she showed no sign of triumph. Facing Ares, already battered by Thea, she had been wounded. Unforgivable. Thea, hiding 2 miles away and observing the battle with the Eye of Horus, was surprised to see Ares still able to unleash his power. Having already shot her arrow of revenge, Diana's protective silver bracelet began to unleash its power, believing Ares' defeat imminent. Unexpectedly, the god of war, seemingly recalling something, miraculously regained some of his strength. Frightened, Thea quickly flinched. Seeing the crimson glow a full 3 feet across Ares' forehead, she knew the depths of his rage. She had no defensive equipment or skills, so she couldn't stand up to him. What? You want me to stab him to death? Are you kidding? Of course, Thea wouldn't just sit there and stare blankly. She discovered that the fake sword could actually communicate with her through simple telepathy. The sword kept urging her to strike Ares. But when Thea tried to throw it to Diana, it refused, as if Diana were some kind of monster. This is a difficult situation, Thea scratched her hair. After a brief exchange, she had a rough idea of the sword's purpose. Calling it a fake sword is a bit unfair. It was originally forged by Hephaestus, the god of fire. 2 swords were forged, one would become Diana's Vulcan sword, and the other was the fake that Thea faced. It's unknown what the god's considerations were, but he stipulated from the moment this fake sword fell into Diana's hands and shattered during the god's war. This decree was his guiding principle from the outset. Although the fake sword had gained a glimmer of consciousness through 5,000 years of worship by the female warriors of Paradise Island, it could not defy its forger's original will. Due to the god's attention, it could not reveal the truth to Diana and could only silently choose to perish. However, Thea's unexpected appearance dramatically changed its fate. Ares' fierce attack caused the distraught Diana to throw it to Thea. So, your original purpose remains, and it will shatter once you return to Diana's hands? It's fine normally, Thea asked, half convinced. The fake sword didn't respond, only urging her to stab Ares to death. So urgent? Did Ares kill your entire family? Thea rubbed her chin, pondering the question about the fake sword. She judged there was a 60% chance that the sword would undergo a drastic transformation if it slew a god. Was it worth taking the risk? As Ares repeatedly used divine power to repair his body, while some strength remained, his spirit was already showing signs of fatigue. Facing Diana's increasingly powerful attacks, his counterattacks became less frequent. As the saying goes, anger is only temporary, relying on rage to kill an opponent is the domain of the protagonist. Unfortunately, Ares wasn't the protagonist. Seeing a chance, Thea cast a barrage of protective spells on herself and instructed her clone to continuously cast magic against Ares, approaching the battlefield without provoking too much hatred. Ares glanced at the clone, unconcerned. He was already struggling to deal with Diana with all his might. A clone with less than 30% of its usual magic power wasn't worth his attention. Chapter 243 The Destruction of Ares. Seeing the clone drawing ever closer to Ares, Thea pondered her plan, feeling it was still a little unreliable. She slashed her palm and, using her own blood, drew a reverse teleportation circle on the spot. This circle was a demonic spell from the Constantine family's grimoire. The circle was incredibly complex, and the bleeding stopped midway through, forcing Thea to make another cut. After carefully checking twice to ensure it was correct, Thea finally began her plan. As Diana and Ares clashed, the once peaceful and tranquil village was shattered beyond recognition. The more power they wielded, the greater the damage to the landscape. The smooth road was now replaced by potholes. The clone continued to weave through the ditches, attempting to reach Ares. I've seen you sneaking around. Damn, and don't think your little tricks can fool the gods. Ares suddenly exploded with speed, shaking off Diana and rushing to the clone. He grabbed the clone by the collar, and with a sinister grin that showed he'd seen through everything, he stared across the distance at Thea's real self. But his smile barely lasted 2 seconds before his grip loosened, and the clone vanished, replaced by Thea's real self. A look of ecstasy barely crossed Ares' lips when he felt a surge of excitement that transcended his body and soul. You're the one who deserved it. At this moment, Thea completely abandoned her restraints. Holding the god-slaying sword in both hands, she thrust it with all her might into Ares' gaping mouth. Then, not daring to gaze upon her results, she activated the blood teleportation array and retreated into hiding once more. Huh? Thea checked herself, feeling remarkably unscathed. This time, she had exploited Ares' arrogance and hatred for her, using the trump card of swapping positions between his clone and his original form. The plan, caught by surprise, was a complete success. Only then did she have time to contemplate her own impressive victory. I can still fight. I won't lose. The ferocious madness in Ares' eyes had completely vanished, replaced by fear and bewilderment. Ares clutched the wound on his mouth as divine power continuously flowed from it, drifting in all directions. I am the god of war. The rate of divine power draining wouldn't change according to his will. Ares cast one last glance at Diana, whose eyes shone with sympathy. His majestic form collapsed with a thud, his weapons, armor, and body rapidly returning to pure divine power and divinity. Thea surveyed the scene and curled her lips. This guy had been fighting for so long, and it turned out to be just a clone. Not a single drop of divine blood left. After waiting another half a minute, she realized Ares had already dissipated more than half, and it looked unlikely he'd jump up and cause trouble. Then, she skated closer. Diana stared at her speechlessly. Thea's alter ego had truly startled her. When she realized she wanted to rescue him, she found she teleported away again. Such escaping speed was a true talent. You won't blame me for killing Ares, will you? Thea whispered. How could that be? Didn't I give you the Godslayer sword? That's your mission. Diana's face was filled with confusion, not understanding Thea's question. Huh? Thea reconstructed the whole situation and guessed Diana's thoughts. Her thinking was incredibly simple, and she still believed her mother's story. In her mind, the Godslayer sword was supposed to have this effect. And if Thea obtained the sword, this was the natural outcome. Was there any doubt about that? Thea resisted the urge to explain the complexities involved, especially after noticing that Ares' divine power had dissipated with a wind, while the war godhood seemed to be gathered together by some force, awaiting something. The gods are watching. I'd rather not tell you the story, it's a bit complicated. You should maintain your good impression of Hippolyta. The two women chatted idly while Thea quietly awaited the distribution of Ares' divine power. Diana should have absorbed all of it in the original time and space, but now with Thea intervening, things have taken a turn. While Thea and Diana's friendship was undeniable, she didn't think giving these divine powers to Diana was a good idea. She didn't need them. If Diana's total divine power was calculated at 1,000, she hadn't even utilized 200 yet. Artificially raising her upper limit would be completely pointless. On the contrary, giving these divine powers to Thea would effectively raise her upper limit from 50 to 150, a significant effect. But she also knew she was, first and foremost, an outsider, while Diana was her biological daughter. The difference in kinship was enormous. To claim she'd been more helpful, she couldn't possibly get more. To secure more benefits for herself, she produced Zeus's lightning bolt. Partly to check its charge status, and partly to show the gods watching over the area, I have the bolt from the boss. We're all family. For the sake of family, you should at least show me some respect, right? Perhaps it was because the gods took pity on her, or perhaps her actions had their effect, but the mighty force that had previously bound the divinity vanished, splitting it in two and pouring it directly into the two women. Threads of light entered Thea's body. This was arguably her first time absorbing divinity. The previous time, she'd passively absorbed it after the unicorn absorbed it, and the absorption of divine blood had been slow and feeble. Although Ares was currently only a clone in the mortal realm, not as powerful as Horus in his true form, Thea had received half of his divine power. While not as powerful as Horus, it far surpassed him in quantity. Countless fragments flashed before Thea's eyes, scenes of tribal warriors hunting, fierce clashes between two armies, and countless images of warriors engaged in passionate battles. Knowledge, a vast understanding of combat, unfolded before her like a film. Originally, Thea's combat skills were decent, though mostly at the bottom of the heap, but she could still be considered a martial artist. Now, with the personal insights of these predecessors, her combat prowess had reached a new level. In a pure combat match, she was confident she could defeat Batman and most likely draw with Lady Shiva. Of course, with her current perspective, combat prowess was no longer her pursuit. She sought immortality, eternity. The knowledge that came with divinity was merely the final piece, For Thea, the greatest benefit of divinity lies in its transformation of the body, strength, speed, endurance, and wisdom, and all-around improvement. If her original mortal body's magic power limit increased by 1 point each day, then after undergoing divinity's transformation, the limit would increase by 10 points each day, rapidly elevating her magic power to a very high level. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 244 Farewell. Sigh, Thea sighed, withdrawing from her state of absorbing divine energy. Like Diana, she couldn't immediately utilize this absorbed energy. This wasn't the Eastern world, where meditation and a few cycles of circulation could achieve this. It required considerable time to digest. Although she had only absorbed a small amount, Thea's divine power had grown stronger, and the duration of her Eye of Horus's use would now be significantly extended. Divinity was truly a wonderful thing. It was a shame there weren't many left in the mortal realm. The amulet of Isis and her space ring only stored magical energy. Thea pondered over the plot she knew, but couldn't fathom the existence of a half-dead god lying there, waiting to be harvested. It seemed she had chopped the god into pieces twice, but in reality, gods were incredibly rare. Horus was summoned by the Vandals, sacrificing their own boundless vitality. How many Vandals were there in the mortal realm? And let alone Ares? This was with the tacit approval of the gods, who had put in immense effort to create a clone in the mortal realm, expending incalculable time and energy. It was a combination of coincidences that allowed her to share in these two encounters. Thea truly didn't believe she'd ever encounter the divine again, but through these two absorptions, she had completely bid farewell to mortal life. As long as she completely absorbed Ares's divinity, she might still be far from a demigod, but no one would dispute her claim to divine status. After examining herself, she finally turned her attention to the sword in her hand. Having accomplished the feat of slaying gods and reversing fate, the Godslayer sword had finally shed its luster, revealing its true form. The shimmering aura of the previous blade vanished, replaced by a rich blood red. As if sensing Thea's intentions, the blade lengthened during its transformation, transforming from a Greek short sword into an English longsword. After a brief exchange between the sword and the person, 3 dark lines crossed Thea's forehead. Calling it the Godslayer sword now wasn't entirely accurate. Its primary purpose was to slay Ares. It now had the elegant name, Ares Must Die. Its power was truly extraordinary. It could kill Ares with a single strike, regardless of his status. Such a powerful effect could and only worked on Ares. Against other gods and mortals, it was just an ordinary magic sword. Thea looked at the ground where Ares's body had been. It was now pristine, not even a hair left. Her mouth twitched. Where was Ares's home? Would I go and kill him there? Even a simple thought proved impossible. Ares was Zeus's son, after all. Not only could she not find his kingdom, but even if she did, Zeus wouldn't let her stab his son to death with a single strike. Forged by the god of fire, the sword had another unrelated function. It could absorb fire magic. Thea could channel that fire magic into the blade, creating a blazing flame that looked truly spectacular when wielded. That was the sword's only remaining ability. It looked impressive. What use did I have for it? Dejected, Thea stored the sword in her space ring. Although it had escaped its fate, the qualities that Diana couldn't possess remained. According to the sword, Thea needed to seek a power beyond divine might to rewrite its original design. Opening the Eye of Horus and gazing into the horizon, Thea saw Steve and his men seizing a plane carrying poison gas. She silently chanted a spell, drawing upon the psychic powers within Steve and his men's minds, declaring that they would gradually forget all about Thea over the next 3 days. Finally, the time for parting arrived. Thea lowered her head, not daring to look at Diana. "Go, my love. I'll wait for you. Remember our 100-year promise," Diana spoke first. "I will." The atmosphere between them grew increasingly sweet, their distance slowly closing. Just as their lips were about to touch, a sudden voice interrupted them. "Oh. Ares is dead. We're free." Roar, an unusually cheerful voice shattered the intimate atmosphere. "Oh my." Thea nearly pulled out the god-slaying sword again, her eyes gleaming with a fierce gaze as the cow, which had crawled out of the pit and bounded towards them, came bounding to them. The cow was genuinely frightened by their looks, as Diana was staring at her with a fierce, murderous aura. Stones and debris were floating in the air. What's wrong? The cow didn't know what was happening, but she knew she was in trouble. She kept bowing and saluting, her large, watery eyes fixed on the two. Why are you still here? Thea wasn't the type to take her anger out on others. Besides, regardless of her motives, the cow had at least helped her. If she and Ares had pursued her with all their might, the outcome would have been unpredictable. The cow bowed, her eyelids slightly raised at Thea's words. She glanced at her, noticing that the murderous aura had largely dissipated. She raised her head in relief and said cheerfully, "That idiot set me free, so of course I'm here. Where else would I go?" The cow replied matter-of-factly, with an expression that said, "You don't even understand such a simple truth. Are you a descendant of Minos?" Diana, well-versed in myths and legends, looked around the heifer, her eyes sparkling, a faint reminiscence of the look she'd had when she'd seen the man on Paradise Island. The heifer, perturbed by her gaze, as if she were studying something new, spilled the beans, revealing her purpose. "So Hades's situation isn't good either. Your people's favorite place to live is a complex labyrinth. As the deity who protected your clan, he no longer has the power to build one for you? Do you think the shadow maze I released earlier is a good place to stay? Do you want to reside there permanently?" Thea summarized her thoughts. Fortunately, the heifer spoke Greek, and after some halting words, she finally managed to get her point across. Thea spoke, and the heifer nodded, finally looking at her expectantly. "That's Artemis's space. Do you still want to go?" The heifer, having caught Ares' eye, must have considerable combat prowess. Dominating the space wouldn't be easy, but surviving would be possible. The only concern was whether her near job-hopping behavior would trigger further chain reactions. Sure enough, upon hearing that it was the goddess of hunting's territory, the heifer immediately shook her head, indicating a more holistic view of the situation. Finally, Thea discussed matters with her and promised to build her several autonomous mazes in the real world. The Quinn group wouldn't find such work easy. With the addition of the AI Gideon, the world would be transformed in 3 days, then drastically in 5. Hearing of such a good opportunity, the heifer hurried into the space ring, ready to return to 2008 with her. Having finally tricked this powerful force into leaving, Thea looked around, finding no more troublemakers around. She embraced Diana with a domineering embrace and kissed her on the lips. Diana's lips were as heroic as she was. When their lips touched, Thea felt bursts of fresh air floating in her mouth. Her smooth teeth and slightly cool tongue brought her a strong sensory stimulation. The two hugged each other for a long time without letting go. Chapter 245 The Truth of History. "I'm leaving, Diana Prince. Hold on to your faith. We'll meet again in 100 years. Their lips parted, and Thea gently stroked her cheek. Neither of them was the type to be shy, and they readily released each other's embrace. "I'll wait for you. I'll wait for you to sing that song again." Although it wasn't a life or death farewell, Diana's mood was inevitably a little low. Thea drew Zeus' lightning bolt, drew the bowstring, and chanted a special spell, activating the arrow's special magic circle. To Thea, this was like submitting a request to higher authority. Only with the approval of Zeus could the arrow open the space channel. Fortunately, this setting was there, otherwise, the arrow would be useless. Who could bear the thought of it traveling through time while firing? The arrow traveled at full speed, opening a deep blue halo of light not far from them. The arrow's divine power was completely depleted and returned to the quiver. "Take care," Thea waved to Diana with a smile. "Take care of yourself, too. I'll be waiting for you here in 100 years, Diana instructed calmly. After confirming she hadn't missed anything, Thea stepped into the time tunnel. This trip was different from the previous two. On the first one, Gideon's timeship was with her, and she was merely a passenger. On the second, she was caught in an explosion and completely out of control. Now that she had Zeus's approval for this time journey, and her movements were normal, she wanted to take a closer look. A leisurely tour wouldn't be an option, but she didn't have to rush like the Flash, either. The beauty of the time tunnel wasn't for everyone. Using her authority within the Time Council, Thea carefully observed the events after her departure. Naturally, she first observed Diana's progress. Diana buried the villagers in the small village and didn't participate in the subsequent battle. The timeline's image of her future seemed to have been erased. The fluctuations of divine power looked familiar. It was clearly Zeus's doing. What did he mean? Did he not want me to see what was happening? Since she couldn't see, Thea could only look at the other people's experiences. Without their intervention, Ludendorff lived peacefully until 1937. Thea nodded in agreement. That made sense. Ludendorff's death in 1918 was nothing special. He had been a Democratic presidential candidate, after all. That was the history she knew. But when she read about Steve Trevor's experience, she was stunned. Without their two powerful supporters, Steve still managed to grab the plane. But instead of exploding mid-air like in the movies, it crashed on the border between France and Spain. A toxic cloud filled the skies over Europe. Globally, 1 billion people were infected. While the Americas and Asia were less affected, Europe was the hardest hit, with a conservative estimate of over 20 million deaths. Countless women, children, and soldiers wounded in the war perished. This is the mysterious event recorded in history as the Spanish flu. This widespread viral outbreak completely shattered the backbone of Europe. Considering that World War I lasted 4 years and suffered only around 10 million casualties, the patriotic young Captain Steve Trevor's sudden victory far surpassed that of World War I, consuming more than half of Europe's wartime potential. Overjoyed, American politicians, while desperately trying to conceal their connections, secretly dispatched a large number of forces to search for the crashed Steve. After a tacit tactical maneuver, they successfully rescued the unconscious Steve. Steve, unaware of the immense contribution he had rendered to his country, his actions ultimately rendered Britain, France, and other nations unable to withstand Germany during World War II, giving the United States the opportunity to act as savior and save the world. The spark of civilization drifted to America, but Steve never regained consciousness. He had been at the epicenter of the poisonous gas at the time of the crash, and the violent explosion of the plane had simultaneously damaged his body with both burns and the poison. These two fatal injuries triggered a new chemical reaction within his body, slowly transforming his body. He only slowly regained consciousness in the 1980s. Considering his outstanding contributions to America's global dominance, several powerful figures promoted him to colonel. Furthermore, his unwavering loyalty to his country led to his formation of the Sky Eye Society, a process that continued until 2008, when Thea was still alive. Thea stared at a photo of Steve in his first year as colonel in the time tunnel, her eyes shrouded in gloom and a stern expression. The handsome man from 1918 had completely vanished, replaced by a patriot whose physique was no longer human. Reflecting on Steve's subsequent life trajectory and repeatedly comparing it with her own memories, Thea realized that Steve had no recollection of his involvement. She knew her magic had worked. It's unbelievable. Steve was the cause of the mysterious Spanish flu? Was it a coincidence or a historical necessity? Now in the time tunnel, Thea's memories were crystal clear. There was no question of memory tampering. The facts were clear and unequivocal. Her involvement had indeed occurred. As for the plot of the movie, that was a parallel universe, right? It's all over. Thea shook her head and stopped reading. The rest of the content was what she knew. Using the Time Council's authority, she easily found the time she'd left and slowly walked in. Where is this? Thea happily crossed the time tunnel, fully expecting to return to Purgatory Island. But as far as she could see, this place had nothing to do with the island. A weed-covered wasteland, with several thick stone pillars standing nearby. Having absorbed a great deal of divine energy, she was no longer a mortal. A subtle sense of belonging told her that this was her time point. She surveyed the nearby stone pillars, seeing familiar patterns in letters. Was this Greece? Living in modern times, she didn't dare launch directly into space in broad daylight, fearing the satellite might capture her. She could only use the Eye of Horus to try to find a few locals to ask. The people here weren't wealthy. A quick glance revealed a few scattered figures nearby, some transporting goods in farm vehicles, and some elderly people taking their children for a walk. Judging from the people's attire, they didn't seem European. Finally, Thea found a middle-aged woman with a prominent nose and deep eyes, carrying a backpack and looking like a tourist. With her good looks and friendly tone, she finally found out where she was. This was in Turkey, the ancient city known as Ephesus in the Bible, modern-day Ephesus. The desolate area where Thea had first appeared was the Temple of Artemis, one of the 8 wonders of the world. Thea felt the urge to cover her face. Needless to say, this must have been the moon goddess's subtle manipulation at the exit, playing the sympathy card. Her once magnificent temple was now a wasteland. As one of the chosen ones, shouldn't you show some respect? With a heavy heart, Thea said goodbye to the enthusiastic tourist and found a hotel to stay in. Thanks to Colonel Steve, the United States had become a world power, and English was widely spoken. As a famous tourist city, the hotel owner spoke some English. Through gestures and conversation, Thea finally managed to borrow an international long-distance phone. Chapter 246, Hard to Find and Return. She had left the Waverider in such haste that she only took her cell phone and credit card. But after more than half a year, her cell phone had long since died. Thea didn't have much spending money, and her credit card was issued through a U.S. trust fund, which the hotel owner wouldn't recognize. She didn't want to alert the Star City crowd, but thankfully, she had the support of the Court of Owls. While they had no influence here, they could still transfer a few $1,000s for emergencies. Faced with her request, Catherine Monroe couldn't just hand over a few $1,000s and call it a day. She tapped into some connections within the court and urgently sent her a large shipment of emergency supplies. Within an hour, a group of men in black delivered a large sum of cash, clothing, and passports to Thea. The stunned hotel owner, imagining a story of a wealthy princess traveling on her own, quickly vacated his best room for this impressive princess, whom he suspected was from a European country. After a quick cleanup, Thea picked up her new phone and called the Louvre in France. "Excuse me, is Miss Diana Prince here?" Thea asked nervously after the call was connected. The other party mumbled a bunch of gibberish that confused Thea. What was he talking about? It sounded like French. They were truly the same old enemies. The whole world spoke English, and only they still spoke French. Luckily, Thea had learned a few French phrases when Diana was still a child, and she was able to engage in a conversation with the Frenchman on the other end of the line, even though it was a completely different language. Half an hour later, Thea put the phone down. Damn, this guy definitely speaks English, but he won't. She wanted to crawl over the phone and strangle him. It was so infuriating. Thea was terribly anxious, and the other end was languidly talking to her for half an hour. Where had Diana gone? The operator slowly and deliberately chatted with Thea for half an hour. Thea repeatedly asked questions, but the other party didn't get angry, but the message was clear: we don't have this person in the Louvre. Fearing it would affect the timeline, Thea didn't tell Diana about her future, and Diana wisely didn't ask. Her initial joy was extinguished. The Eye of Horus wasn't capable of global search, so Thea, without resting, gathered her belongings and left Turkey with a sullen expression. En route, she used magic to control a wealthy second-generation prostitute, commandeered a motorboat, and sailed into the eastern Mediterranean. Arriving on Crete, Thea searched in the opposite direction of her departure, circling back and forth 3 times, but found no trace of Paradise Island. Whether it was Hippolyta's reluctance to see her, or the island's forbidden magic realm obstructing her view, remained unknown. Finding nothing, Thea could only retrace their steps until they reached the small Belgian village where they had fought Ares, where they finally found Diana. "It's been 3 months since you left. I missed you so much. It's been 5 years. Did you make it home safely? Humanity is waging another world war. I don't sense any signs of Ares' resurrection. They're so complicated. I'm going on a world tour. I miss you every day. The African people are truly hospitable. I love them. You've been gone for 80 years. Do you still remember me? Come find me soon." A dark blue stone slab stood where Ares fell. It was densely covered with handwriting. The words revealed Diana's years alone in this small village. The words expressed attachment, joy, but most of all, intense love. Thea drew the Godslayer sword, infused with fiery red magic, and slashed it into the distance. Her full force created a ditch half a meter deep and over 10 meters long. "I didn't mean to do that either." Thea dropped the Godslayer sword and knelt on the ground, pounding the ground with her hands, tears streaming uncontrollably. Diana's last written message was in 1998. There seemed to be signs of the female warriors from Paradise Island leaving the island, so she went to investigate. Thea was utterly distraught. She didn't know where Diana had gone, and how she could find her in such a vast sea of people. After reporting her safety to her family in Star City and saying she would stay in Europe for a few days, Thea remained alone in this village, once ravaged by poison gas and no longer suitable for human habitation. Traces of the battle still lingered in the village, but more so, the desolation of Diana alone remained. Whenever Thea saw the marks of a noose or the impact of a shield, she would smile foolishly. "Hey, shouldn't we go? We've been here for 3 months, said the little cow Thea had tricked into living in the luxurious maze. It was only after a month that Thea remembered her. The little cow was truly kind. Upon learning of her plight, she didn't complain, but offered occasional comfort. "Yet, staying here forever isn't a solution. We're bound to meet again someday anyway," Thea said. They were no longer mortals. A mere 100 years was worth the wait. He took out his sword and carved another message beneath a stone slab, acknowledging his presence there. He then left the name of Star City in the ancient language of Theologia. Diana, knowing that once she arrived, would be able to sense him through the shared power of Artemis. He then invited the heifer into his space ring. This creature couldn't be seen in public. This wasn't 1918. Satellites whizzed by constantly. A while ago, while practicing the Eye of Horus, Thea had witnessed a massive satellite orbiting over Europe. A large Wayne Enterprises logo on it indicated this was Batman's Watchtower space base. Batman couldn't let such a peculiar creature like the heifer see it. After 2 flights, they arrived safely in Star City. Moira had been sworn in as mayor of Star City 2 months prior. Thea had witnessed the entire process live, then hurried back to the village, claiming she had something else to do. This time, she finally felt at home. She first went to City Hall to meet Moira, then was completely overwhelmed by a myriad of other matters. The Black Man, Walter Steele, and Moira parted ways amicably after an undisclosed conversation. As the largest shareholder in the group, Thea, having turned 18, automatically assumed the chairmanship of Quinn Group. She made no major changes after taking over, appointing a former vice president as president and promoting Felicity to a nominal vice president position, continuing to lead the software department. Dr. Hoffman, with whom Thea had once struck up a friendly rapport, was appointed director of Quinn Group's newly established Applied Science Laboratory. Thea selected some less sensitive data from the Atoms archive for them to study. She worked continuously for a month, meeting with department heads and receiving reports from branch managers. While large-scale brainwashing was the most convenient and efficient method, she couldn't afford to be so brazen in this age of psychics. If the board heroes discovered her, she'd be labeled a villain. Chapter 247 Big News. Sigh, Thea sighed, throwing away her pen, and dismissing the department head, who had come in to report but was actually professing his loyalty. This transition between the old and the new presented a multitude of challenges. Old subordinates needed to be appeased, while new ones needed attention. Undermining and tripping each other up was a daily occurrence in her office. The Eye of Horus could only discern good and evil, but ancient notions of good and evil differed greatly from modern ones. Many individuals considered villains in ancient times were, in fact, capable and assertive within the Quinn Group. Identifying these individuals and leveraging them for crucial purposes took Thea considerable effort. "I think I forgot something." Turning around in her chair, Thea suddenly thought, "Oh no. I forgot Oliver." She'd promised to bring him home, but now, because of Diana, it had been delayed for 3 months. Was it still too late? Of course, it was too late. Oliver was probably working as an agent for Amanda, wreaking havoc. With her relationship with Amanda, it wouldn't be difficult to bring him back, even at a cost. But could Oliver, trapped in darkness, ever see the light without further suffering? Let him be. Thea knew Oliver's stubborn nature. If she didn't interfere, he would surely reach his former heights. Thea had gained a great deal from her time travel, but there were still a few things she needed to collect herself. First was the Ninja Master's magic sword. According to Madame Xanadu, it could absorb the magic from the amulet of Isis, a crucial asset for Thea, who lacked magical power. But she was stumped by the exact address of Nandarbet. Malcolm had left for Europe alone a month before her return to Star City, leaving no contact information. Batman and Talia knew the address, but since she was dealing with their father-in-law, and biological father, they might not share it. Furthermore, the Ninja Master's backer was Sangongmo. The thought of this filled Thea with trepidation. Although this great demon had been sealed, it was always better to be safe than sorry. Superman, Diana, and the Flash combined to defeat this guy, but they couldn't break his defense. With this kind of strength, he could probably fight Darkseid for a while, right? Thea really didn't think she could defeat him. Another person who could be of great help to her was the artificial intelligence hidden in Central City's cutting-edge technology laboratory. Although Thea was now a magical practitioner, she hadn't forgotten her technological skills. She wasn't so reckless as to use invisibility to steal things. Through the Court of Owls, Thea hired an unrelated assassin to scout the area. Thea came across the profile of this female assassin, Elphilistia. Whether it was magical or supernatural, She wielded 2 daggers, which she could manipulate with her hair. The profile indicated that she had a 100% mission completion record and had never failed. Thea instructed the court to pay the deposit as agreed. The request was simple, just investigate the laboratory. But Thea still underestimated the Reverse Flash, a time-traveling assassin from the 25th century. The assassin was detected upon entering the lab. Spectrometers, far-infrared radiation, vibration-sensing floorboards, and other systems erupted in a blaze of activity. Within a minute, over a dozen rifle-wielding guards appeared. The assassin, a formidable figure, escaped, taking 3 bullets, returned his deposit, and vowed not to return. He had underestimated the power of technology. His tragic fate was a revelation to Thea, who, having grown increasingly reliant on magic, rediscovered her admiration for science. The promise of artificial intelligence rekindled Thea's desire for more. A second time, she enlisted Felicity's hacking skills to locate a security guard working at the lab. After subconsciously brainwashing him, she manipulated him into gathering information. However, within 3 hours of entering the lab, the guard's mental activity was detected to be abnormal. Thea quickly activated his original personality, restoring everything to normal. After an examination, he was diagnosed with emotional distress, and the attack was averted. Thea knew she couldn't act rashly. Too many people were watching advanced labs. Conglomerates, state governments, and the military had all invested vast sums. Even the Quinn Group had made a token contribution. With so many interested parties, Reverse Flash wouldn't be easily exposed, leaving her with little opportunity to strike. Was she really going to have to wait until the particle accelerator exploded, leaving only a few of the remaining people at advanced labs? Thea shook her head. It was taking too long, and she felt a little resigned. After careful consideration, she realized it would be beneficial to be familiar with the plot. Her sights were set on Caitlin Snow, a bioengineering doctor who would be Reverse Flash's key assistant for the next few years. Dr. Snow wasn't currently working at advanced labs, but was instead teaching at Princeton. Thea planned a circuitous route, applying for her graduate program and then infiltrating the lab. Western society was very categorical about personal identity. Billionaires could become superheroes, princes could serve in the military, and so, naturally, Thea could become an intern. She had been delaying her registration, and the school was threatening to expel her. But when they heard she was the president of the Quinn Group, they were completely speechless. A century-old prestigious school. Thea could only laugh. With her now divinely transformed mind, university education would be a piece of cake, graduation in 6 months, a master's in a year, and a doctorate in 2. A doctorate would implicitly elevate one's social status. Take, for example, Master Bruce, a learned scholar, but without a degree, and now the media is calling him uneducated. It's a shame to think about him. Becoming a ninja master is a long-term goal, a cutting-edge laboratory is a mid-term one, but Thea's immediate goal is simply to make a big story. She wants a story that will reach the world, so Diana would surely see her wherever she is on the planet. If I can't find you, I'll ask you to find me, but making global news is no easy task. With her own mother just entering politics, it couldn't be a scandal, it needed something truly eye-catching. Thea quickly found a story that met all the requirements and was sure to attract Diana. She wants to rebuild the Temple of Artemis. It seems easy to tear down and rebuild a pile of broken stones in the wilderness. With the political power in Thea's hands, building a temple in Turkey is really not a big deal. But her request is not so simple. She wants to attract the attention of the media around the world. The temple that Thea wants to tear down and rebuild is one of the 8 wonders of the world. She wants to reproduce the splendor of this ancient building in its original place. She has to face scholars, experts and news media from all over the world. The resistance to this matter is unimaginable. Thea's plan is to secretly send the Court of Owls to bribe local Turkish lawmakers and several think tanks around the president. On the surface, she uses her identity openly, obtains permission from the U.S. government, and takes a 2-pronged approach to make this big news as soon as possible. El Filistia is provided by book friend Alian Hondan. Chapter 248, Looking for a Sucker? Thea, are you crazy? Do you have a fever? Felicity, who hadn't seen Thea for over a year, or really only 3 months at most, was furious and ready to confront her. You're actually going to tear down one of the 8 wonders of the world and rebuild it? Such a big deal, and you're hoping no one will talk about it online? How can that be possible? Felicity huffed. not caring that this was the CEO's office. "Isn't this just a discussion with you?" Thea, aware of the magnitude of the matter, prepared to gather a few trusted people to come up with a rough plan, but was met with strong opposition from the very first step. "You're going to go against the entire history of human civilization, and you're not going to talk about it?" Felicity was bewildered. Why would someone as intelligent as Thea take on such a thankless task, and still go on and on? Thea wondered if this news was too big. But considering they'd automatically arrived at the temple through the time tunnel, the goddess's intentions were obvious. To both find Diana and fulfill the goddess's mission, the temple had to be rebuilt. It held a wealth of historical and cultural value for humanity. To the goddess, this is her temple. You've left it like a wasteland, a place where no birds dung or chickens lay eggs. It's just a wasteland, but you humans are organizing tens of thousands of people to visit every day. What's your intention? Are you here to laugh at me? No matter how miserable I am, I won't let you make a fool of me. Whether it's to get Diana's attention or for the goddess's honor, this temple must be demolished and rebuilt. Realizing that she had been a little presumptuous at first, Thea went to Moira that night to discuss her ideas. Repair a temple? Moira, who was reading a magazine, was stunned by her words. Isn't that within the scope of our Quinn Group's business? Thea looked at Moira's puzzled expression and knew that her words were a bit shocking. Anyone would think that she was young and arrogant. To gain Moira's trust and to pave the way for injecting her with divine blood later, Thea decided to show off a little. "Mom, look." Thea scanned the furnishings in the room and spotted Moira's scarf. That was it. Transfiguration. A flash of pale green light flashed, and the once static scarf twisted and distorted as if being dragged by someone, eventually transforming into a top hat. Thea beckoned, placing the hat before Moira's eyes, allowing her to personally judge its authenticity. Moira, who had lived for over 40 years and considered herself knowledgeable, was genuinely taken aback. Initially believing it to be a magic trick, she fumbled with it, wondering, "Wow, it's a hat, but how could it be?" It took a moment before she realized it had some connection to the topic of the day. Moira carefully chose her words. "Is acquiring this power the reason you want to build a temple? Will it harm your health?" As a mother, Thea's first thought wasn't about Thea's current power, she was concerned only about her children's safety. Thea didn't dare to discuss too much with Moira all at once. Things like divine blood and divine nature were so alien to the normal worldview. Moira was once a nouveau-riche CEO, and now a political newcomer. She was still far from understanding the deeper secrets of this world. Holding Moira tightly, mother and daughter slowly floated into the air. "Don't worry, Mom, don't you think I'm getting healthier?" "Oh. Flying has always been a human dream." Although it was indoors, limited to a small range of movement, Moira was still thrilled. "The truth is, you have to give as much as you gain." As a businesswoman, Moira understood the principle firsthand. Having felt this extraordinary power, she began to consider Thea's big news plan. "You can show up. At most, you can participate in some activities as a major investor after everything settles down, but you can't make the final decision." Moira, realizing that Thea was no longer her spoiled daughter, spoke seriously after much deliberation. Thea was troubled. Moira and Felicity's meaning was similar, and the conclusion was the same. Thea's own prestige was insufficient. Even if the whole world agreed, how could she, Thea, accomplish this? And what if the whole world didn't agree? Once this thing got underway, the criticism would be the least of the problems. Where would I find prestige? Killing a god is impressive, but the public doesn't know about it. And you can't hold a press conference with a god-slaying sword and claim it stabbed Ares to death. The whole world would think you're crazy. If you must build this temple, I suggest the government take the lead in facilitating it. Moira's suggestion was simple. The US government had already done so many things that angered the people, so it wouldn't be a problem if it did a few more. Government artillery had already bombed ancient Iraqi cities, so demolishing a temple wouldn't be too outrageous. The conversation continued late into the night. Using her intelligence network, Moira outlined several high-ranking government advisors and reformist lawmakers who could influence the government. This matter, in essence, had a wide scope. It didn't actually impact any of the interests of the various parties involved. Compared to sending troops to fight a war, it was a trivial matter. With Moira's advice, Thea finally retracted her decision to dig the first shovel herself. She decided to be a participant, content to attract attention. But who should she entrust with this glorious and arduous task? Finding a scapegoat isn't easy. Such a scapegoat must possess a certain level of social prominence and be thick-skinned enough to withstand the media's fierce opposition and the fierce opposition from the global academic community. It's really difficult. 3 days had passed since the mother-daughter conversation. Moira had begun a small-scale lobbying effort, while Thea was now in her office, with Felicity, screening the politicians who could be persuaded. The Court of Owls wasn't much help in this matter. Their connections outside were limited. If they frequently resorted to assassination and coercion, it would undoubtedly attract excessive attention, which contradicted Thea's original vision of the court. Ms. Quinn, there's a man named Jim Gordon outside who wants to see you. He says he knows you. Just as Thea was brooding, a call from her assistant interrupted her thoughts. Who? Gordon, the one from Gotham? What did he want with her? After checking his appearance and confirming that it wasn't a duplicate name, it was indeed the old Gordon. After all, they had fought together. Thea and Felicity personally left the office to greet him downstairs. Miss Thea, old Gordon looked dusty and his face was extremely grim. With so many people coming and going around, he couldn't say much. He reluctantly said hello and went into the office with her. Thea waved to her assistant to bring coffee and asked the old director to sit down. Seeing his hesitation, she could only start a small talk. Are Uncle Bruce and Barbara all right? It would have been fine if she hadn't asked. When she did, the old director burst into tears. Barbara, she's been seriously injured. She's not going to make it. Chapter 249, Barbara Gordon is seriously injured. Commissioner Gordon's tears welled up as he spoke of Barbara. Initially, his story was fragmented, but eventually he could no longer continue. He took off his glasses and sobbed non-stop. Thea and Felicity exchanged bewilderment. Their combined ages were less than Gordon's, and it felt awkward for the younger generation to witness such grief, yet they didn't know how to offer comfort. Fortunately, elder Gordon remained resolute and managed to recount his purpose. The Joker injured her spine, and Bruce determined she couldn't get back on her feet. I hate my own weakness, Commissioner Gordon spoke, pumping his fists. Fortunately, Thea had just taken over as CEO, and the room was empty, otherwise he could have pounded something to vent his frustration. Ms. Thea, you're also part of a high-tech group. Bruce has no other options, but I'd like to ask if you have any way to get Barbara back on her feet. Commissioner Gordon looked at Thea with hope, yet worried she might say she couldn't wait, dashing his hopes. Alice, the heart of a parent is pitiful. It's easy for those who can't. This would be a catastrophic problem for others, but for Thea, well, she could even repair Captain Cold's genetic chain. It was only a spinal injury, a minor injury considering her magical prowess. But considering Bruce's usual hostility towards the supernatural, there was a chance her good intentions might backfire. But Thea couldn't be so heartless as to push the choking old director out of the way. Old director, I've thought of 3 solutions. Listen, please consider them. Thea, who usually wore plain glasses to appear mature, removed them and rubbed her eyes. Oh my. 3 solutions. Old Gordon's heart nearly leaped out of his chest. 3 solutions in less than a minute. From grief to joy, he felt a momentary daze. The first option is neural reconnection with mechanical assistance. I haven't seen Barbara's wound, but Quinn Group has the technology. We can create a metal belt that bypasses the wound and connects the nerves up and down. She can walk independently, but I'm afraid she won't be able to fight again. Seeing the old director's composure stabilize, Thea spoke. This, Director Gordon pondered carefully. Being able to walk seemed much better than the lifelong wheelchair confinement he had anticipated. But he was still worried Barbara wouldn't accept it, so he nodded seriously, indicating that he would consider it, and waited for Thea to continue. The second option is nanorobots. These robots would reside permanently in the body, connected to the nerves through computer control. After a period of recovery and training, they would return to their original level. However, electromagnetic pulse bombs can cause fatal damage to nanorobots, so be careful. Before Gordon could reply, Felicity whispered, "Do we have the technology?" Thea nodded woodenly. Her mind was, "We don't have that technology. This is all the technology of the future atom." In the original universe, Felicity was also paralyzed by a gunshot wound, her symptoms similar to Barbara's, and she was restored to normal thanks to the atom's nanobots. While the atom might be a bit of a joke, the technical documentation he provided was truly advanced. With Thea's current knowledge, much of it was incomprehensible, and she'd need at least a doctorate to fully grasp it. However, the nanobots were very rudimentary. requiring only minimal clinical testing before they could be used for treatment. But what she considered a trivial technology was, in Gordon's eyes, hope. This solution was fantastic. It could restore her to her original state. As for the electromagnetic pulse bomb, the old director could accept it. Even with all the chaos in Gotham, no one would throw such high-end stuff around every day. That's absolutely fine. I can pay for it, no matter the cost. Please help me, the old director finally smiled. His risky trip to Star City had paid off. But he still wanted to hear Thea's final solution. What if it was even better? It wouldn't take much time to listen. What's your other plan? Thea sighed, a ball of light appearing in her hand. She'd discussed her magic with Felicity a few days ago, explaining how to repair the temple. She'd even used it to carry the girl aloft, causing Felicity to vomit and complain. Exposing it to Gordon now was a precautionary measure. Unless she never used her magic again, it would be discovered sooner or later. Exposing it while he needed her would also earn her a lot of impression points. Magic can restore her to normal, but the cost is accelerated cell growth, shortening her lifespan by 5 to 10 years. This was pure nonsense. While she didn't have the powerful magic she'd had on the Waverider, she could easily create a simple recovery circle. To make the task seem more difficult, she exaggerated the consequences. After all, lifespan is something you can't see or touch, so who knows how much you can say. It had to be said that the old director, having spent years fighting crime on the front lines, had embraced superpowers much more quickly than Moira and the others. He didn't ask about the source of his powers, instead pacing the room in thought. Thea didn't rush him, it was practically a matter of seconds. She was confident in the matter. The magic circles and the like were for outsiders to see, and making them mysterious and complex would make it easier to negotiate for benefits. She had been trying to find a victim to spearhead the temple demolition, but now the candidate had popped up. Old Gordon was the perfect fit in every way, well regarded and well established, and his late life conversion to religion seemed plausible. Perhaps he'd hesitate to tear down the Statue of Liberty for his daughter's sake, but he had no problem tearing down a temple in Turkey. But she couldn't be so clear about it now, as if she were negotiating a deal. If she showed any hesitation afterwards, the old director, as shrewd as she was, would surely understand. Commissioner Gordon was lost in a sea of thought, his mind racing with thoughts, and he couldn't make up his mind for a moment. Can I discuss this with Bruce? I'd also need to get Barbara's opinion. The old commissioner realized that every choice was difficult. When he was at his wit's end, an idea was a lifeline. Now that there were so many, the choice was becoming more difficult. Of course, can you connect to the Batcave? The old commissioner replied, and Thea asked her companion the second. Who am I? I'm a world-class hacker. Felicity, a little arrogant, grabbed the keyboard and began to clatter away. Less than 3 minutes later, Bruce's figure appeared on the LCD screen in Thea's office. The ever-elusive Batman was startled by the sudden lighting of the screen. From what Thea and the others could see, he was punching a punching bag alone. Chapter 253 Options. Batman's eyes flickered with panic, but he quickly regained his composure. He glanced at the three people on the screen and greeted them calmly. Miss Thea, Miss Felicity, are you hacking my system? Seeing him not panic, the two women, somewhat annoyed, made way, leaving the conversation to Commissioner Gordon. Robotics, nanotechnology, magic. Batman knew Thea had some tricks up her sleeve, but her magic wasn't as impressive as he'd expected. But now, faced with 3 options, he hesitated. He wouldn't judge his loved one's health by his own standards of right and wrong. If Alfred were fatally injured, he would do everything in his power to save him. While Barbara wasn't as important to him as the old housekeeper, she was still a family member. Furthermore, Barbara's involvement this time stemmed from his own battle with the Joker. Batman felt guilty for causing Gordon, at his age, to suffer such a severe injury. However, he felt the non-orbit solution was the best. His thinking was similar to Gordon's. There weren't that many M-bombs. If all the gangs had electromagnetic pulses, most of his technological equipment would be paralyzed, and he'd be in trouble. Let's ask Barbara what she thinks. I'll go find her right away. Batman cut the connection signal. His computer skills were not bad, and Thea and the others didn't hide it from her. They quickly found that Thea and the others were connected to the Batcave at the Quinn Corporation headquarters in Star City. But Batman couldn't find any loopholes in his system after checking for a long time. The system he had worked so hard to build was easily broken by Felicity, which made him a little speechless. I must study it carefully when I get back. After saying that, he went out to pick up Barbara. Why did he hang up? Can't he afford the electricity bill for the Batcave? Thea and Felicity were a little puzzled by his hanging up the signal. He's just like that. You get used to it. Gordon knew Batman very well. He explained sheepishly. The group could only wait. Thea instructed her assistant to dispatch a helicopter. They would have to go to Gotham shortly, if nothing unexpected happened. Teleportation wasn't in her spellbook. The future cyborg, could teleport thanks to Mother Box technology from Apocalypse. Spatial knowledge was profound and complex, far beyond her current capabilities. Less than half an hour later, the monitors in the room came back on. It was obvious Batman had hacked in. Thea mouthed to Felicity, "That means you need to upgrade the group systems as soon as possible." What did that mean? It meant overtime. Felicity resented the Batman on the screen. Barbara appeared before the two women, looking gaunt. The beautiful red-haired girl from that day now looked completely withered and listless. She turned away, especially when she saw Thea and the other girls on the screen, not wanting them to see her distraught appearance. Why was he still in this state? The others looked at Batman in confusion. "I didn't tell her your method. She needs to make her own decision." As expected, the word method lit up Barbara's eyes. She bit her lip, looking at the people on the screen in disbelief. Thea was now playing the role of a doctor, so she could only recount her several methods, citing all the pros and cons, and let Barbara choose. Barbara covered her mouth, overcome with emotion. She was at her lowest point, and she would grasp at any glimmer of hope. She would accept even one, let alone three. But at life's crossroads, everyone is perplexed by the choices. She couldn't decide which path to take, and looked to Commissioner Gordon and Batman for help. "It's up to you, we support your decision." Both important figures expressed their opinions. It didn't matter which one you chose. I choose the magic method," Barbara said, glancing at Batman from the corner of her eye. She understood her teacher's point, but she just wanted to be back to normal. What was the point of adding a robot to her body? As for losing a few years of life, she was only 20, so it didn't really matter to her. With all the fighting and swordplay going on every day, she didn't think she'd live to see her death. Batman nodded, without commenting. He said to the screen, "Then please ask Miss Thea to come over. I'll prepare whatever materials are needed." "Okay, we'll discuss the details in person," Thea said, hanging up the phone. She couldn't help but sigh. A single bullet had reduced a once blooming young woman to this state. This was the helplessness of ordinary people. While Thea's own body was far inferior to Diana's, it had been transformed by divine power and was immune to pistol bullets. Rifle rounds would only scratch her skin. Unless she was facing a powerful, instant-killing attack, she could still recover with divine power. He instructed Felicity to watch over the house and upgrade the group systems. As Thea's activities grew, so would the attention she attracted. She didn't want her company to be constantly visited by hackers. The journey to Gotham was smooth. The Gotham gangs were still reeling from the fighting 6 months prior. Under Gordon's guidance, Thea landed the plane on the shore, and the two entered the infamous Batcave. The Batcave had been destroyed by Bane the last time Thea was there, so it was unclear whether this place was newly built or old. The eerie environment was very Gotham-esque, reminiscent of a haunted house. With the aid of the Eye of Horus, Thea quickly spotted 3 secret rooms. Who knew how much of the infamous Tower of Babel project was covered? "Miss Thea, remember my words. Don't mention Dick in front of Barbara," Thea said, wearing her business wear high heels. Walking in the shallow cavern felt uncomfortable, and the old director, as if remembering something, quickly reminded her. "I know, don't worry." On the way, Thea got a rough idea of what had happened since their separation. Dick Grayson, the original Robin, had left Batman and embarked on his own path, changing his name to Nightwing. He had also amicably parted ways with Barbara and was no longer in Gotham. Batman had to find a new assistant, and he chose the burly Jason Todd to serve as the second Robin. Barbara had suffered not only emotional trauma but also physical injuries, forcing Batman to find another place to train Jason Todd, fearing she might see him and spark negative associations. "Hey, Uncle Bruce, you look well." When Thea entered the room, she could see Batman sulking, writing code. Of course, it wasn't because he was switching careers to code, but because Felicity had provoked him. Bruce nodded. "I'll take you to see Barbara first. I just gave her a sedative." She's very unstable. He then led the two into the inner room. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.